The Arizona sun baked the blacktop of the Sonoran Desert Resort. Heat waves distorted the wrought iron security gates, making the scene beyond them shimmer like a mirage. But the chaos was real. Standing on the wrong side of the barricade was my sister Olivia. She was encased in a $10,000 pearl-encrusted silk gown, screaming until her voice cracked. A gust of dry wind snapped her bridal veil across her fiancé's face. Preston stood frozen in a custom tuxedo. Sweat gathered at his hairline. His jaw hung slack as he stared at the wall of uniformed corporate security officers blocking the ballroom entrance. 150 guests milled about the lower parking lot in a stunned holding pattern. They clutched wrapped gifts in pastel envelopes, watching the bride hurl herself against a reality she could not manipulate. I stood 30 feet above the chaos on the resort's marble terrace. I held a crystal glass of sparkling water, the ice clinking softly against the rim as I took a slow sip. The tailored lines of my emerald blazer held sharp against the harsh light. I did not raise my voice. I did not smile. I simply watched the empire of lies unravel exactly as I had engineered it. Down below, a guard stepped forward to keep Olivia from scaling the low limestone retaining wall. She broke down, sobbing dry, jagged gasps. Her expensive makeup ran in dark tracks down her cheeks. The guard reached into his breast pocket and handed the weeping bride a cocktail napkin. She snatched it to press against her eyes, then froze. Her gaze dropped to the thick, cream-colored paper. Stamped directly into the center in forest green foil was a crest. Harris Financial. My company. It was not her wedding monogram. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The venue did not belong to her. It never had. Welcome back to Morning Revenge, where we explore the exact moments people realize they played the wrong game with the wrong person. If you have ever been treated like a walking checkbook by your own family, drop a comment below with your age and let me know I am not the only one. Now let me tell you how a lavish wedding dissolved into a corporate barricade. To understand the screaming bride on the asphalt, we have to rewind 21 days. The climate in my downtown Scottsdale office was perfectly regulated. The air conditioning hummed a steady note while I sat behind my glass desk reviewing offshore asset portfolios. The scent of bitter espresso lingered in the air. My secondary monitor pinged. A banking notification glowed white against the dark screen. Wire transfer cleared. Amount, $35,000. Beneficiary, the Sonoran Oasis Resort. I closed the tab, taking a brief measure of satisfaction in keeping my word. My sister had pleaded for the capital 2 months prior. She sat in my office, twisting her engagement ring round and round her finger, claiming Preston's family trust disbursements were caught in a tedious legal delay. I built my wealth management firm from the ground up while she chased country club invitations, so I paid the sum in full. It covered the venue, the catering minimum, and the deposit for the floral arrangements. Exactly 48 hours after the funds settled, a new email materialized in my inbox. The subject line read, "Wedding Updates." I opened the message. The text was brief, devoid of warmth, and surgically precise. Olivia wrote that after deep consideration, my corporate energy and overbearing presence would clash with the elegant aesthetic Preston's family expected. Therefore, I was no longer on the guest list. She instructed me to respect their privacy and to stay away from the ceremony I had just funded. My eyes flicked to the carbon copy line. The email had been sent to Beatrice Harris, our mother. The silence from her side of town deafened the room. My mother had not called to buffer the blow. She had not driven over to explain. Her lack of a phone call confirmed a truth I had swallowed for 2 decades. Olivia was the favored investment, and I was merely the bank. A familiar hollow ache started in my chest, the kind that usually sent me reaching for my phone to draft a desperate peacekeeping text, the kind that makes you shrink yourself to fit at a table where they only want your wallet. Not today. I looked closer at the email. The phrasing was too rigid for my sister. Olivia spoke in exclamation points and scattered thoughts. This read like a legal notice. A quick glance at the digital footprint confirmed it. The document had been drafted on Preston's IP address. He had co-authored the uninvitation. He was afraid of me. He knew my auditing skills could dissect a balance sheet from across a room, and he wanted me nowhere near his wealthy family. He expected me to disappear quietly into the Arizona heat, too embarrassed to cause a scene. I did not reply to the email. I did not call my mother to weep. Instead, I opened my encrypted drive and pulled up the master vendor agreements for the resort. A slow, cold clarity washed over me. Olivia had terrible credit. When it came time to secure the reservation, the resort required a guarantor. I had stepped in, but I did not just sign my personal name. I ran the transaction through my corporate entity, Harris Financial, to secure a VIP corporate rate. The legal loophole sat right there in black and white ink. The venue was not Olivia's. Under the strict cancellation policies and binding arbitration clauses of the state, the reservation belonged entirely to my firm. Olivia was simply an authorized guest on a corporate tab. I picked up my phone and dialed the direct line for Sloan, the resort's elite event coordinator. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and accommodating, likely expecting a question about linen colors. I told her we needed to schedule an immediate meeting. I kept my tone level, stripped of any familial hurt. I explained that the wedding was canceled, but the $35,000 reservation was not. I was exercising my right as the sole contract holder to rebrand the date. I listened to Sloan draw a sharp breath on the other end of the line. The rustle of paper in her background stopped abruptly. She stammered for a moment, processing the sudden shift in power. I told her to bring the floor plans and the catering upgrades to a cafe downtown in 1 hour. The pivot had begun, and the trap was officially set. The air inside the espresso bar felt crisp, a sharp contrast to the blistering Arizona heat radiating off the pavement outside. I sat at a corner booth, the cool leather grounding me. Across the small marble table sat Sloan, the lead event coordinator for the Sonoran Oasis Resort. She held her brushed metal tablet tight against her chest. Her knuckles were white. Her smile was tight, practiced, and cautious. She had dealt with runaway brides, drunk groomsmen, and screaming mothers. She braced herself for a tearful breakdown. I did not give her one. I brought the standard cancellation penalty waivers, Sloan said, her voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper. Given the familial circumstances, the general manager is willing to refund 50% of the catering deposit. Put the waivers away. I kept my hands folded on the table. We are not canceling the date. Sloan blinked. Her practiced smile faltered. But you said on the phone that the wedding was off. The wedding is dead. The reservation remains active. I slid a slim black folder across the marble. Open it. Sloan opened the folder. Inside was the master contract she had drafted 3 months ago. I tapped my index finger against the bold ink at the bottom of the page. Notice the signatory, I said. Sloan leaned in. Her eyes scanned the lines. She read the name aloud, her tone shifting from pity to dawning comprehension. Harris Financial. Olivia has a credit score that terrifies banks. I explained, my voice steady. When your finance department required a guarantor for the $35,000 deposit, I routed the transaction through my wealth management firm to secure the corporate tier pricing. That makes this a corporate asset. I reached across the table, took Sloan's fountain pen, and drew a thick black line straight through the names Olivia and Preston at the top of the event manifest. The scratch of the nib against the heavy cardstock was the only sound in our corner of the cafe. I am restructuring the event, I said, handing the pen back. We are pivoting from a pastel wedding to an executive client appreciation gala. I want the blush pink linens swapped for charcoal and emerald. Cancel the string quartet. Book a 5-piece jazz ensemble. Remove the floral arches and replace them with low architectural centerpieces. Sloan's posture changed. The tense event planner vanished, replaced by a sharp hospitality executive. She pulled out her stylus and began tapping rapidly on her screen, crossing out wedding cakes and inputting high-end tasting menus. The custom cocktail menus, she asked, her eyes alight with the challenge. Scrap the his and hers drinks. Serve a top-shelf bourbon bar and vintage champagne. And Sloan? I paused, waiting for her to look up. Under Arizona corporate privacy statutes, this rebrand is strictly confidential. My firm is the client. Any inquiries regarding this date from unauthorized individuals must be met with a standard security denial. Do not confirm or deny anything to anyone who is not me. Sloan nodded, a genuine spark of professional respect lighting up her eyes. Understood. The venue is on lockdown. 10 miles away, in the hushed, carpeted interior of a luxury boutique, my sister existed in a dangerous fantasy. The air smelled of conditioned leather and expensive perfume. Olivia sat on a velvet ottoman, her foot extended, as a sales associate buckled a pair of strappy, crystal-adorned heels. Olivia admired her reflection, tilting her head to watch the light catch the stones. She chatted aimlessly to the associate about Preston's aristocratic lineage, projecting an aura of generational wealth. She spoke loudly enough for the other shoppers to hear, painting a picture of a life where money was abundant and effortless. "I will take them," Olivia declared, handing over a sleek credit card. The associate walked to the register. Seconds later, a soft, negative tone chimed from the machine. The associate returned her expression carefully neutral and murmured that the card had declined. Olivia's face flushed a deep, uncomfortable red. She snatched the card back, blaming a fraud alert, and rummaged through her designer purse for a different one. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed over a secondary card, one carrying an interest rate that would haunt her for years. It approved. Olivia let out a breath she had been holding, clutching the shopping bag like a life preserver. She had no idea the ocean beneath her was already draining. She walked out of the store believing she had outsmarted reality, completely unaware that her perfect wedding venue was currently being redesigned for local tech investors. I walked out of the cafe, sliding my sunglasses over my eyes as the desert sun hit my face. My phone vibrated in the pocket of my blazer. It was not a standard text message. It was a notification from a secure, encrypted messaging application I used for sensitive corporate audits. I unlocked the screen. The sender was Maya. Maya was my brother David's wife, and she was the only person in the Harris family who operated in reality. As a senior forensic accountant for a multinational firm, Maya viewed the world through the lens of verified data. She had zero tolerance for the theatrical manipulation that governed my mother's household. When Maya first married into our family, my mother Beatrice had tried to control her with passive-aggressive guilt trips and staged emotional outbursts at the Thanksgiving table. Maya had simply watched Beatrice cry, offered her a tissue, and calmly asked if she was finished. They had feared Maya ever since. Maya and I shared a quiet, unbreakable alliance built on logic. Her message contained a single attachment and a brief note. "You asked me to run a quiet preliminary audit on the Kensington Trust. You need to look at page 4. We have a situation." I sat in the driver's seat of my car. I left the engine off. The heat radiated through the windshield, warming my hands as I opened the file. Maya had bypassed the public relations fluff the Kensingtons fed the country club circuit and dug straight into their offshore filings. My eyes traced the columns of red text: shell companies, restructured debt, default notices buried under layers of legal jargon. The Kensingtons were not old money aristocrats. They were a sinking ship, taking on water faster than they could bail it out. The grand estate they boasted about was mortgaged to the hilt. The trust funds were dry. Preston was desperate. He needed a wealthy bride to save his status, and he thought he had found one in Olivia, who was busy charging designer shoes to maxed-out credit cards to impress him. They were two con artists marching toward an altar, each believing the other held the winning lottery ticket. A new realization clicked into place, cold and sharp. Preston had not just uninvited me because my personality clashed with his aesthetic. He drafted that email because he knew I was a wealth manager. He knew that if I attended the wedding, I would eventually ask the right questions, look at the right documents, and expose his entire facade. He was hiding a financial catastrophe, and I was the only person in the family capable of reading the blueprints of his ruin. My phone buzzed again in my hand. A calendar alert popped up on the screen. It was an automated reminder for the wedding rehearsal dinner scheduled for the following evening. Olivia and Preston thought they had outsmarted me. They thought I was sitting at home nursing a bruised ego silenced by my own family. They had no idea I was holding their actual venue contract in one hand and their financial death warrant in the other. I reached for the ignition. The defensive phase was over. The physical evidence of their deception sat on my screen, waiting to be deployed. Before I could back out of the parking space, a shadow fell across my windshield. I looked up. My mother's luxury sedan was idling directly behind my car, blocking me in. Beatrice stepped out into the heat, her face set in a mask of concerned authority. She had come to enforce the uninvitation in person. The engine of my mother's luxury sedan idled a low purr, disrupting the quiet afternoon outside the cafe. Beatrice stepped onto the scorching asphalt. She wore a tailored linen suit that defied the Arizona climate, not a single wrinkle visible on the pristine fabric. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her posture rigid with practiced authority. She marched toward my window and rapped a manicured knuckle against the glass. I rolled it down, letting a wave of dry heat invade the air-conditioned cabin. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was feeling. She ordered me to drive home so we could have a civilized conversation away from public eyes. I put my car in gear and navigated around her sedan. She followed me, her heavy chrome grille filling my rearview mirror the entire drive up into the foothills. My home features vast expanses of glass, polished concrete, and natural wood, a sanctuary of order built on my own success. Beatrice hated it. She stepped through the heavy oak front door and immediately began her visual audit. Her gaze swept over the minimalist furniture, lingering with visible distaste on a bold, abstract canvas hanging above the fireplace. She called the space sterile. She preferred homes cluttered with inherited antiques, physical proof of generational standing and unearned status. I walked to the kitchen island and poured 2 glasses of iced water. I slid one across the dark granite countertop toward her. She ignored it. She placed her designer handbag on a leather stool, smoothing the front of her jacket. She had come to handle a business transaction, wrapped in the thin guise of maternal concern. "Let us address this unfortunate misunderstanding," Beatrice began. Her voice was coated in artificial warmth, the tone she used when negotiating charity board seats. "Olivia is under immense stress. Preston's family carries significant social expectations. You must understand how your strong personality can feel overwhelming to a bride trying to impress the Kensingtons. It is not personal, Jacintha. It is merely a matter of appearances." I leaned against the counter, watching the woman who had spent decades prioritizing my sister's comfort over my basic dignity. The scent of her expensive floral perfume filled the kitchen, heavy and cloying. I asked her why she was standing in my home if my presence was so overwhelming to her favored child. Beatrice sighed, releasing the long-suffering exhale of a practiced martyr. "We need to tidy up the logistics," she said smoothly. "Preston requires the venue contracts transferred into his name. It is a minor administrative detail to ensure the wedding planning proceeds smoothly without further friction. Just sign the transfer authorization, and we can all move past this little drama." The audacity hung in the quiet room. She wanted me to hand over a $35,000 asset to the man who had just orchestrated my exile. I looked my mother in the eye and delivered a single word: no. Beatrice blinked. Her practiced smile cracked. She tried to laugh, a dry, brittle sound that did not reach her eyes. "Do not be stubborn," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "You are wealthy. You will not miss the funds. Do this for your family." I told her I had already done enough for this family, and the contract remained with my firm. The temperature in the room plummeted. Beatrice resorted to her oldest weapon. Her hand flew to her chest. Her breathing hitched, turning shallow and rapid. She slumped against the edge of the kitchen island, clutching her pearl necklace. Her face contorted into a mask of sudden, extreme pain. She gasped, whispering that my selfishness was giving her heart palpitations. She claimed I was causing her actual physical harm. 10 years ago, this performance would have broken my resolve. I would have rushed to her side, apologizing, signing whatever she wanted to ease her suffering. Today, I did not move. I reached into my pocket and unlocked my phone. I told her I was dialing emergency services. I kept my voice flat. If she was experiencing a genuine cardiac event, paramedics would be here in 4 minutes to run a full diagnostic panel. I held my thumb over the screen, watching her closely. The fake palpitations stopped. Her breathing returned to a steady, furious rhythm. She stood up straight, smoothing her jacket once more. The frail victim routine vanished instantly. Her eyes turned cold, stripped of any maternal pretense. She warned me that if I ruined her chance to secure a prestigious son-in-law, I would be cut out of the family forever. She promised I would spend the rest of my life entirely alone. I pointed toward the front door. I told her I preferred quiet solitude over expensive lies. She grabbed her handbag and marched out. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind her, echoing through the empty house. Before the sound of her engine faded down the street, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. My cousin Maya stepped out of her hybrid sedan. Maya carried a thick, leather-bound portfolio under her arm. We did not share pleasantries. She walked straight into my kitchen, dropped the portfolio onto the island, and unzipped it. Maya worked as a forensic auditor. She hunted hidden assets and buried liabilities for a living. She operated on facts immune to the emotional blackmail that fueled my mother. Maya pulled out a stack of financial records, sliding a certified document toward me. "Look at the date," she instructed. I traced the ink. It was a bankruptcy filing registered in a notorious offshore tax haven just 3 weeks ago. The primary holding company for the Kensington estate was insolvent. Preston's family was drowning in toxic debt. The aristocratic image was a hollow shell held up by predatory loans they could no longer service. Preston was hunting for a financial rescue, and he assumed the Harris family had deep, accessible pockets. Maya did not stop there. She pulled out her tablet and opened Olivia's public social media profile. She zoomed in on a recent photograph of Olivia holding a supposedly exclusive designer handbag. Maya pointed to the uneven stitching along the handle and the dull finish of the brass hardware. It was a replica. A very convincing fake, but a fake nonetheless. Olivia was maxing out high-interest credit cards to buy counterfeit luxury goods, projecting an image of extreme wealth to trap Preston. Meanwhile, Preston was leveraging the last drops of his family's credit to project an aristocratic lifestyle to trap Olivia. They were two con artists, locked in a desperate dance, marching toward a wedding that neither of them could afford. My $35,000 venue payment was the only legitimate currency keeping their shared illusion afloat. A notification chimed from Maya's tablet. Olivia had just posted a new update on her feed. It was a digital countdown clock, ticking down the days until the grand ceremony at the Sonoran Oasis Resort. The caption boasted about the unparalleled luxury her guests would experience. The clock was ticking in real time. My firm had less than 3 weeks to transform the venue into a high-powered corporate summit. I needed to send the heavy black embossed invitations to the most influential executives in the state to ensure the trap was set properly. But a new message lit up my phone screen. It was an urgent text from Sloan at the resort. She informed me that Preston's mother, the terrifying Mrs. Kensington, had just called the venue directly. The older woman was demanding a private tour of the ballroom tomorrow morning to inspect the floral arrangements and review the vendor payment receipts. The illusion was on the verge of shattering far too early, threatening to expose my corporate pivot before my high-net-worth clients could arrive. I had to intercept the Kensington matriarch before she reached those doors and discovered the truth. I pressed the dial icon on my screen, calling Sloan back, before the panic in her text message could take root. She answered immediately, her breathing shallow over the speaker. Preston's mother was demanding a site visit. Mrs. Kensington wanted to walk the ballroom, inspect the floral arrangements, and review the final vendor payment receipts. I kept my voice in the low, steady register I reserve for turbulent market days. I instructed Sloan to invoke the corporate blackout protocol. I reminded her that Harris Financial held the master lease for that date. Any individual attempting to access the property or request financial documentation without my explicit written consent was to be denied entry under Arizona commercial privacy laws. Sloane exhaled a long breath of relief, armed with the legal shield she needed to lock the doors. While my corporate firewall slammed shut around the resort, a very different scene was unfolding across town. I learned the details of that afternoon, later pieced together by country club staff who observe everything and forget nothing. Olivia sat on the shaded patio of the Paradise Valley Country Club. She wore a silk blouse that trapped the desert heat against her skin. Across the wrought iron table sat her future mother-in-law. Mrs. Kensington possessed a rigid, terrifying posture and a gaze that stripped people down to their bank accounts. They were supposed to be enjoying a celebratory bridal luncheon. Instead, it was an interrogation. Mrs. Kensington set her iced tea down and leaned forward. She informed Olivia that the Kensington family attorneys required physical proof of the vendor payments. It was a strict stipulation of their prenuptial agreement, designed to ensure the bride was not bringing hidden liabilities into the marriage. My sister sat trapped under the older woman's stare. Olivia had no receipts. She had zero equity. She survived on high-interest revolving credit and the illusion of my silent financial backing. But rather than confess, Olivia constructed a fresh lie. She smiled, her jaw tight, and claimed her personal trust fund had covered the $35,000 venue cost weeks ago. She dismissed me, her own sister, as an estranged, financially unstable relative who was no longer involved in the planning. Mrs. Kensington nodded, seemingly satisfied by the fiction. Then the waiter arrived with the leather checkbook. Olivia reached into her designer purse. She handed over her premium credit card with a practiced flourish, eager to prove her status. The waiter walked away. 2 minutes later, he returned. He did not meet her eyes. He placed the leather book back on the table and murmured the phrase that destroys country club reputations. The card had declined. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the table. Mrs. Kensington stared at the rejected plastic. Olivia felt the heat rise up her neck. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She snatched the card, stammering a chaotic excuse about a banking error and an overly sensitive fraud alert system. Her hands shook as she dug for a secondary card. It approved, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted in her future mother-in-law's mind. Desperation is a powerful catalyst. Olivia excused herself to the restroom, locked herself inside a marble stall, and pulled out her phone. I was standing in my home office when the notification lit up my screen. It was a text message from Olivia. The tone was panicked, demanding, and stripped of the cold authority she had used in her un-invitation email. She ordered me to log into the resort portal, download the payment receipts, and forward the PDF files to her immediately. She specifically instructed me to redact my name from the billing section. I stood by my window watching the dry desert wind sway the mesquite trees in my yard. I read the message twice. I felt no urge to reply. I did not type a sarcastic response. I simply swiped left and deleted the message. Miles away, trapped in a country club bathroom, Olivia watched the read receipt register on her screen. When no reply came, she navigated to the resort's online client portal. She typed in the old password we had set up months ago. She hit enter. A stark white screen returned an access denied error. The system informed her that the event profile had been migrated to a secure corporate server. Please contact your account administrator. She was locked out. The physical venue, the digital records, the financial proof, all of it belonged to Harris Financial. I turned my attention away from my phone and back to the task on my desk. Spread across the dark wood surface were 200 heavy black cardstock envelopes. Inside each envelope was an invitation stamped in emerald foil. I was not hosting a wedding. I was hosting the Harris Financial Desert Summit. My guest list was a curated weapon. I addressed envelopes to the top real estate moguls in Scottsdale. I invited the chief executives of the local tech sector. Crucially, I selected specific high society figures who occupied the same exclusive social circles as Preston's mother. I was building an inescapable trap made of social proof. When the elite of Arizona arrived at the resort, word would ripple through the country club networks. The Kensingtons would eventually hear that the venue they claimed for their aristocratic wedding was actually hosting my corporate gala. I reached into my closet to select my attire for the evening. I bypassed the racks of traditional muted dresses. I pulled out a razor-sharp, custom-tailored emerald suit. It was a garment built for boardrooms and hostile takeovers. It radiated power. I laid it across the back of my leather chair, visualizing the exact moment I would step onto the terrace wearing it. The doorbell echoed through the house, breaking my concentration. I walked down the hall and opened the heavy oak door. My brother David stood on the porch. He looked exhausted. His shoulders slumped under the weight of carrying our family's endless emotional baggage. David was the perpetual peacemaker, a man who spent his life trying to bridge the gap between my mother's toxic favoritism and my strict boundaries. He stepped inside, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. He asked me to reconsider. He told me the uninvitation was cruel, but sabotaging the wedding would fracture the family beyond repair. He begged me to just release the venue to Preston and walk away for the sake of peace. I guided David into the kitchen. I did not argue with his plea. I opened the folder my cousin Maya had delivered earlier that day. I spread the certified documents across the granite island. I told David to read the offshore filings. He leaned over the island, his brow furrowing as he scanned the complex financial terminology. He read the bankruptcy declaration. He saw the staggering debt ratios. I watched the color slowly drain from his face as the reality of the Kensington Empire collapsed in front of him. I handed him the altered master contract for the venue, showing him the corporate pivot. Then I pulled up the photograph of Olivia's fake designer handbag, pointing out the flawed stitching. I explained the mechanics of the mutual con. Preston was using Olivia to secure a wealthy lifeline. Olivia was using Preston to secure an aristocratic title. Both of them were bankrupt. Both of them were lying. My venue deposit was the only real money on the table. David stepped back from the island. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. The peacemaker in him died right there on my kitchen floor. He realized that mediating a truce meant forcing me to finance a fraudulent marriage designed by a man who secretly despised me. David looked up, his expression hardening into quiet disgust. He told me he was done playing a groomsman in a stage play. He turned around and walked out the door, choosing reality over blind family loyalty. Olivia was now losing her allies one by one. But a cornered animal is unpredictable. Denied access to the venue and ignored by her funding source, she took her delusion to the one arena she felt she could control: public perception. My phone chimed with a new alert from a social media tracking software I use for corporate brand management. Olivia had just uploaded a curated album of engagement photos, tagging the Sonoran Oasis Resort. Her caption boasted about the final preparations for her flawless luxury wedding at the property. She was trying to force the issue, attempting to shame the resort into compliance by utilizing her online audience. It was a reckless, desperate move. She did not realize that Sloan's social media manager was already monitoring the accounts, armed with strict instructions from my legal team to protect the corporate blackout dates. The digital war was about to spill over into the public square, and Olivia was bringing a knife to a corporate gunfight. The afternoon sun cast long, angular shadows across the granite island in my kitchen. The digital war had commenced on my phone screen, but the true ammunition lay in the physical documents spread across the cool stone surface. Maya sat opposite me, her posture impeccably straight. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, flawless knot. Maya grew up navigating complex social structures in a household where every single dollar was fiercely tracked and accounted for. She earned her forensic accounting degree by analyzing dense data sets long after midnight, eventually clawing her way up the ruthless hierarchy of a multinational auditing firm. She viewed numbers as a universal language. Math was entirely incapable of lying, flattering, or betraying. It only told the truth. She slid a dense 70-page financial prospectus across the counter. The heavy parchment paper carried the distinct weight of impending ruin. A red adhesive tab marked a specific section buried deep in the appendix: "Read the liability columns," Maya instructed. Her voice remained perfectly calm, completely devoid of pity. I leaned forward, tracing the printed text with my index finger. The document outlined a primary holding company registered in a notoriously opaque Caribbean tax haven. The entity belonged entirely to the Kensington family. For years, Preston and his mother had coasted through the elite country clubs of Paradise Valley, projecting an aura of untouchable generational wealth. They hosted lavish charity galas, drove imported sports cars, and wore custom-tailored garments. The reality printed on the page told a drastically different story. The holding company was a crumbling facade. Maya tapped a manicured nail against a specific line item. "They hold 3 separate mortgages on the primary estate," she explained, her tone surgical. 2 of those are variable interest loans structured through predatory secondary lenders. They missed their last quarterly payment. The bank initiated a silent restructuring process 30 days ago. The Kensingtons are drowning in mezzanine debt, and their liquid capital is virtually non-existent. The scattered pieces of the puzzle slammed together, forming a chilling picture of calculated survival. Preston had not drafted the uninvitation email because my personality clashed with his refined sensibilities. He did not care about corporate energy or overbearing aesthetics. He cared exclusively about self-preservation. "He saw the vendor deposit receipt from the resort," I murmured. The realization crystallized in my mind, cold and sharp. Maya nodded, a grim smile touching the corners of her mouth. "Exactly. He saw the payment originated from Harris Financial. He ran a basic background search on your firm and realized his future sister-in-law was a senior wealth management consultant. You are the exact apex predator who hunts leveraged debt for sport." Preston panicked. He knew that if I attended the wedding ceremonies, I would eventually mingle with his family. I would ask the right questions about their investment portfolios. I would notice the subtle, undeniable indicators of insolvency. He needed to build an impenetrable firewall between his crumbling empire and my auditing expertise. The cruel email was a desperate defensive maneuver to keep the wolves away from his door. But the deception was a two-way street. Maya reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out her laptop. She connected the device to the large smart monitor mounted on my kitchen wall. The screen flickered to life, displaying my sister's public social media profile. "Let us evaluate the bride," Maya said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She opened a high-resolution photograph Olivia had posted 2 days prior. In the image, Olivia sat at a luxury bistro, casually resting a supposedly exclusive Parisian handbag on the table. The caption contained a subtle brag about early wedding gifts. Maya magnified the image, zooming in on the hardware of the purse. "Look at the brass clasp," she directed, pointing at the screen. "The metallic finish is far too yellow, indicating a cheap alloy blend rather than solid plated hardware. Now examine the stitching along the leather handle. The authentic manufacturer uses a distinct angled stitch with exactly 12 threads per inch. This item utilizes straight stitching and features only 8 threads. Furthermore, the grain of the leather is artificially stamped. It completely lacks the natural porous texture of the genuine article." I stared at the monitor, absorbing the brutal forensic breakdown of my sister's manufactured life. "She is funding a counterfeit luxury lifestyle on revolving retail credit," Maya concluded, closing the image. "She is maxing out high-interest cards to purchase highly convincing fakes." The psychology of their mutual con laid bare in front of me was absolutely staggering. Olivia and Preston were 2 predators circling each other in the dark, entirely unaware that they were both starving. Preston required a wealthy heiress to inject immediate capital into his dying trust fund. He believed Olivia possessed deep, accessible family wealth. Olivia required a billionaire heir to elevate her into the highest echelons of desert society. She believed Preston possessed a vast, untouchable fortune. They were selling each other premium tickets to a ship that had already slipped beneath the waves. A sudden, sickening truth settled into the pit of my stomach. I looked down at the original catering and venue contract I had signed weeks ago. My initial capital injection was the only real currency anchoring their entire fraudulent enterprise. I said, my voice barely rose above a whisper as the magnitude of the situation set in. Maya closed her laptop with a definitive snap. Without your $35,000, the resort would have canceled their hold months ago. Preston would have been forced to admit he could not cover the deposit. Olivia would have been forced to admit she possessed zero equity. Your money bought them the time they needed to keep lying to each other. The dramatic irony filling the room was thick enough to suffocate a person. I now knew my sister was aggressively, ruthlessly fighting to marry into a bankrupt nightmare. She had burned her relationship with me to protect a crown made of painted tin. She discarded genuine loyalty for an illusion that would destroy her credit and her future. Before I could fully process the sheer scale of their shared delusion, the large monitor on the wall refreshed automatically. A new alert flashed across the top of Olivia's feed. She had just uploaded a fresh post to her timeline. It was a live digital countdown clock. The stylized numbers ticked downward in real time, marking the exact days, hours, and minutes until the grand ceremony at the Sonoran Oasis Resort. The caption beneath the clock bragged about the unparalleled opulence awaiting her elite guests. She tagged the venue, the executive caterer, and a dozen high society influencers. She is accelerating the timeline, Maya noted. Her eyes locked on the ticking numbers, reading the desperation embedded in the code. Olivia was completely oblivious to the fact that she was dancing on the jagged edge of a financial cliff. By publicly broadcasting the countdown and aggressively tagging the resort she was attempting to force reality to bend to her will, she believed that if she gathered enough public attention, the venue would simply bow to the pressure, ignore the contract dispute, and hand the ballroom back to her. She did not understand corporate mechanics. The resort's public relations team, operating under the strict privacy clauses I had invoked earlier that day, would have no choice but to respond. They could not allow a false narrative to compromise a major corporate buyout. The conflict was no longer contained to cold emails and private country club luncheons. The digital clock forced a massive, uncontrollable escalation. The collision course was permanently set, moving rapidly from private financial sabotage to a highly visible public relations crisis. The trap was ready to spring, and Olivia was rushing headlong toward the steel jaws. The air inside the Paradise Valley Country Club was thick with the scent of roasted duck and expensive floral arrangements. Silver cutlery clinked softly against fine china, a delicate soundtrack to the high society rituals unfolding across the dining room. Olivia sat at a corner booth overlooking the manicured 18th green, trying to ignore the dampness gathering beneath her silk blouse. Across the starched white tablecloth sat her future mother-in-law. Mrs. Kensington possessed the posture of a monarch and a gaze that routinely dismantled the self-esteem of everyone she encountered. She wore a tailored ivory suit and a string of pearls that Olivia assumed were heirlooms. They were supposed to be enjoying a celebratory bridal luncheon to discuss menu pairings and seating charts. Instead, the older woman had turned the afternoon into a relentless financial interrogation. Mrs. Kensington set her crystal water goblet down. She did not smile. She rested her hands on the table, her diamond rings catching the overhead light. She spoke in a low, measured tone, ensuring the neighboring tables could not hear the conversation. She explained that the Kensington family attorneys were finalizing the prenuptial agreement. It was a standard protocol, she insisted, meant to protect the generational assets of their estate. The lawyers required physical documentation verifying that the bride brought zero hidden liabilities into the marriage. Specifically, Mrs. Kensington noted they needed the finalized receipts from the Sonoran Oasis Resort. She demanded proof that the venue catering and floral vendors were paid in full. Olivia felt a cold spike of adrenaline pierce her stomach. Her pulse thudded in her ears, drowning out the ambient noise of the dining room. She had zero equity. She survived on a mountain of revolving retail credit and the quiet financial backing of the sister she had just exiled. She had no receipts to produce. The $35,000 deposit belonged entirely to Jacinta. But Olivia possessed a remarkable talent for self-preservation through fiction. She forced a serene, practiced smile. She reached for her iced tea, taking a slow sip to buy a few seconds of time. She set the glass down and looked her future mother-in-law directly in the eye. She lied without a single hesitation. Olivia claimed her personal trust fund had covered the $35,000 venue cost 3 weeks ago. She spoke of her financial portfolio with casual arrogance, adopting the exact tone she had heard Preston use when discussing his own fictional wealth. The performance was seamless. She waved a manicured hand in the air, dismissing the cost as a minor administrative detail she had handled personally to ensure the aesthetic remained uncompromised. Mrs. Kensington's eyes narrowed slightly. She asked about the rumor that Olivia's sister had been involved in the initial booking process. Olivia did not flinch. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. She painted a picture of Jacintha as an estranged, erratic relative. She described her sister as financially unstable, a woman who struggled to maintain professional boundaries and constantly sought attention. Olivia claimed she had been forced to cut Jacintha out of the wedding entirely to protect the elegant atmosphere the Kensingtons deserved. She framed the uninvitation not as a cruel betrayal, but as a noble sacrifice made to protect Preston's family from embarrassment. Mrs. Kensington nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied by the explanation. She commended Olivia for making the difficult choice, noting that aristocratic families could not afford to associate with unstable elements. The dramatic irony hovering over the table was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. The older woman demanding financial purity was secretly drowning in predatory offshore debt. The young bride boasting about her trust fund was financing her designer wardrobe on cards with 30% interest rates. They were two desperate impostors sitting across from each other, nodding in mutual approval of their shared delusion. Then the waiter arrived. He placed a black leather checkbook gently on the center of the table. Olivia immediately reached for it. She insisted on treating her future mother-in-law to the lavish meal, eager to cement her status as a woman of independent means. She unclasped her replica designer purse and pulled out a heavy, metallic, premium credit card. She placed it on the receipt with a flourish, making sure Mrs. Kensington saw the exclusive branding. The waiter took the book and walked away toward the register. Olivia exhaled quietly, believing she had survived the interrogation. She resumed chatting about the string quartet she planned to hire. 2 minutes later, the waiter returned. His posture was rigid. He did not meet Olivia's eyes. He placed the leather folder back on the table and leaned down, whispering a phrase that carried the power to destroy country club reputations in a matter of seconds. The card had declined. A suffocating silence fell over the booth. The ambient chatter of the dining room faded into a distant hum. Mrs. Kensington stopped stirring her coffee. Her gaze drifted from the leather folder up to Olivia's face. The predatory glint returned to the older woman's eyes. Heat flooded Olivia's cheeks, turning her skin a blotchy, uncomfortable red. The silk blouse clung to her spine, soaked in sudden perspiration. Her hands shook as she opened the folder and stared at the rejected plastic. She snatched the card, her voice rising an octave as she stammered a chaotic, breathless excuse. She blamed a banking error. She blamed an overly sensitive fraud alert system triggered by her recent wedding purchases. She dug frantically through her purse, her fingers scraping against keys and cosmetics, until she found her secondary card. This one was plain plastic, a high-interest line of credit she reserved for absolute emergencies. She handed it to the waiter, her chest heaving as she tried to maintain her serene smile. The waiter left and returned moments later, the backup card approved. Olivia signed the receipt with a trembling hand, but the damage was irreversible. The seed of doubt had been planted. Mrs. Kensington thanked her for the lunch, gathered her heirloom purse, and walked out of the dining room with a stiff, calculating stride. Left alone at the table, the facade cracked wide open. Olivia felt the walls closing in. The lawyers would demand the venue receipts by the end of the week. If she could not produce the documentation, Preston's mother would launch a full investigation into her background. Her counterfeit life would be exposed. Desperation is a powerful catalyst for terrible decisions. Olivia pulled out her phone. She opened her message thread with Jacintha. The last correspondence was the cold, clinical, uninvitation email she and Preston had drafted. Now she needed the sister she had discarded. She typed a frantic, demanding text message. The tone was stripped of any polite pretense. She ordered Jacintha to log into the resort portal immediately, download the payment receipts, and forward the PDF files to her personal email. She explicitly instructed Jacintha to redact her name and the Harris Financial logo from the billing section, insisting it was a minor favor to keep the wedding planning on track. She hit send. She sat in the empty booth watching the screen. A few moments later, the tiny red receipt indicator appeared beneath her message. Jacintha had opened it. Jacintha was looking at the demand. Olivia waited for the typing bubble to appear. She stared at the screen until her eyes burned. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 10. Nothing happened. No response, no angry retort, no confirmation. The silence from her sister's end was a loud, deafening rejection. Panic morphed into genuine fear. Olivia could not wait for Jacintha to comply. She needed those documents before Preston started asking his own questions. She closed the messaging application and opened her mobile web browser. She navigated to the Sonoran Oasis Resort client portal. Her fingers slipped on the glass screen as she typed in the username and the shared password she and Jacintha had set up 3 months prior. She tapped the login button, expecting to see the familiar pastel dashboard containing her floral invoices and catering menus. Instead, a stark white screen loaded. A red error icon flashed at the center of the display. The system text informed her that the event profile no longer existed in the standard database. The reservation had been migrated to a secure corporate server. The page displayed a bold, impenetrable warning: access denied. Please contact your account administrator. Olivia stared at the glowing error message. Her breath caught in her throat. She tried entering the password again. She tried resetting the account. Every attempt hit the same digital brick wall. The realization washed over her cold and paralyzing. The physical venue, the digital records, the financial proof, all of it was locked behind a corporate firewall she could not breach. Jacintha had not just ignored her text. Jacintha had seized total control of the wedding. Trapped in a country club booth with a maxed-out credit card and a fabricated trust fund, Olivia knew she was out of options. She could not produce the receipts. She could not access the venue. She had to escalate the situation before Preston's family discovered the truth. She needed a new strategy to force the resort to hand the reservation back to her, and she needed to do it in a way that left Jacintha with no avenue of escape. The transition from a bridal fantasy to a financial summit required ruthless efficiency. I had exactly 20 days to scrub the Sonoran Oasis Resort clean of my sister's aesthetic. My home office became a command center. Spread across my glass desk were fabric swatches, revised menus, and updated vendor contracts. The original plan called for blush peonies and draped chiffon. I directed Sloan to cancel the floral order and secure structural arrangements featuring white orchids and dark architectural foliage. We discarded the string quartet that was scheduled to play classical ballads during the reception. In their place, I booked a renowned 5-piece jazz ensemble, known for setting the rhythm at exclusive executive retreats. The catering menu underwent a similar purge. Out went the fondant cake and the champagne fountains. In came a curated tasting menu featuring dry-aged Wagyu beef, seared scallops, and a top-shelf bourbon tasting bar. Every logistical decision erased a piece of the illusion Olivia had constructed. The ticking clock demanded absolute precision, and precision was my native language. Before the invitations went out into the world, I needed to define the visual anchor of the evening: myself. For years, family gatherings carried an unspoken dress code. My mother always guided me toward muted tones. She suggested navy blues, pale grays, and flat beige. The goal was to fade into the background, ensuring Olivia remained the undisputed focal point in her bright, attention-grabbing gowns. I played the role of the reliable, invisible benefactor. That era was over. I drove to a bespoke tailor in downtown Scottsdale, a seasoned craftsman who dressed the most formidable litigators and executives in the state. I bypassed the racks of traditional evening wear. Instead, I ran my hands over bolts of raw silk and premium wool blends. I selected a rich, saturated emerald green. The tailor measured me for a razor-sharp, double-breasted suit. The jacket featured severe shoulders and a tapered waist, projecting authority rather than softness. When I put on the initial fitting garment, I looked in the three-way mirror and saw a woman who commanded rooms, not a sister who apologized for taking up space. The emerald fabric radiated unyielding corporate power. It was armor forged in luxury. With the aesthetics locked in, I initiated the primary offensive. The guest list was the most critical component of the strategy. I sat at my dining table that evening running my hands over a stack of thick double-ply cardstock. The invitations were matte black, heavy enough to demand respect the moment they were pulled from the envelope. The text was stamped in matching green foil. Harris Financial Desert Summit, a night of strategic partnerships and authentic wealth. I did not invite family. I targeted power. I addressed envelopes to the reigning commercial real estate developers of Maricopa County. I added the founders of 3 emerging technology firms I had recently helped take public. But the true architecture of the trap lay in a specific dozen names. I cross-referenced my client database with the Paradise Valley Country Club roster. I selected influential society figures, women who sat on the same charity boards and attended the same exclusive galas as Preston's mother. By inviting Mrs. Kensington's peers to my corporate event at the exact venue her son claimed for his wedding, I engineered a collision of realities. Social proof is the only currency the elite truly value. When those black envelopes landed on marble entry tables across the valley, whispers would begin. The Kensingtons would learn their venue had been conquered not from me, but from the very peers they were desperate to impress. I was sealing the final envelope when the doorbell echoed through the house. I walked down the hall expecting a courier. Instead, my older brother stood on the porch. David looked exhausted. Deep shadows gathered under his eyes, and his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of carrying our family's endless emotional baggage. David was the perpetual peacemaker. He spent his entire adult life trying to bridge the ever-widening gap between Beatrice's toxic favoritism and my strict boundaries. He stepped inside, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. He asked me to reconsider. He acknowledged that the uninvitation email was a cruel mistake, a severe lapse in judgment on Olivia's part. However, he pleaded that sabotaging the wedding would fracture the family beyond repair. Beatrice had been calling him every hour, weeping into the phone, demanding he fix the situation. He begged me to release the venue reservation to Preston and walk away. He even offered to personally refund a portion of my deposit just to keep the peace. I guided David into the kitchen. I did not argue with his plea. I did not raise my voice. I simply opened the leather portfolio Maya had delivered earlier. I spread the certified documents across the granite island and told him to read the offshore filings. David leaned over the counter, his brow furrowed as he scanned the complex financial terminology. He read the bankruptcy declaration. He saw the staggering debt ratios. I watched the color slowly drain from his face as the Kensington empire collapsed in front of him. I handed him the altered master contract for the resort, showing him the official corporate pivot. Then I pulled up the forensic breakdown of Olivia's counterfeit designer handbag. I laid out the mechanics of the mutual con. Preston was utilizing Olivia to secure a wealthy lifeline. Olivia was using Preston to secure an aristocratic title. Both were insolvent. Both were lying. My deposit was the only real currency on the table, and they had tried to steal it while locking me outside. David took a slow step back from the island. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. The dedicated peacemaker inside him died right there on my kitchen floor. He realized that mediating a truce meant forcing me to finance a fraudulent marriage designed by a man who secretly despised our family. David looked up, his expression hardening into quiet disgust. He told me he was done playing a groomsman in a stage play. He turned around and walked out the door, choosing verified reality over blind loyalty. Olivia was losing her allies one by one. She was running out of shadows to hide in. I gathered the sealed black envelopes, placing them in a secure leather dispatch bag for the morning courier. Just as I fastened the brass buckle, my phone chimed with a priority email notification. I opened the screen. The chief executive officer of the largest real estate trust in Arizona had just submitted his response. He checked the box marked yes. The cornerstone of the trap clicked into place. The Desert Summit was officially the premier event of the season, holding the attention of the state's most powerful people. The physical doors to the venue were locked. The digital records were secured. The social elite were mobilized. But a cornered animal is unpredictable. Denied access to the physical property and ignored by her funding source, Olivia took her delusion to the one arena she felt she still controlled. She decided to wage a public relations war, unaware that she was walking directly into a digital minefield. The battleground shifted from private mahogany dining rooms to the glaring arena of public perception. Olivia, cornered by her own expanding fabrications, retreated into the one domain where she still controlled the narrative. She launched a relentless digital campaign. She opened her phone and began mining her photo gallery for images taken during our initial venue tour months ago. She selected a pristine shot of the Sonoran Oasis Resort ballroom, a sweeping panoramic view of the crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the desert sunset. She applied a warm filter, smoothing out the harsh reality of her situation. Her thumbs flew across the glass keyboard, crafting a caption that radiated arrogant certainty. She typed about finalizing the ultimate luxury experience, promising her followers an unforgettable evening of high society elegance. She added a dozen hashtags associated with elite Arizona brides. Then she deliberately tagged the official resort account, anchoring her fantasy to a physical location. She hit publish, relying on the sheer momentum of social proof to bend the truth. She believed that if she projected enough confidence online, the venue executives would bow to public pressure and reinstate her reservation to avoid a scandal. She fundamentally misunderstood corporate mechanics. Sitting in my home office, I watched the post appear on my monitoring feed. I did not need to intervene. Sloan and her public relations department were already holding the reins. The resort operated under strict commercial privacy mandates, and my legal team had thoroughly briefed them on the blackout protocols for the Harris Financial Desert Summit. A high-tier corporate buyout required absolute discretion, and a rogue bride claiming ownership of the property posed a direct threat to the venue's reputation. Less than 20 minutes after Olivia published her post, the digital countermeasure deployed. The tagged location link vanished from her picture. The resort's social media manager manually removed the association. But the venue did not stop at a silent untag. They issued a formal public clarification directly in the comments section of her post. The official resort handle left a crisp, undeniable statement. The text read that while the property appreciated the enthusiasm, the ballroom was secured under a private corporate blackout contract for the specified weekend. The comment politely requested the removal of misleading associations with the property, wishing her the best in finding an alternative location. The humiliation was instantaneous and painfully visible. The comment sat there, a glaring neon sign pointing toward her deception, readable by every country club peer and distant relative on her friend list. Olivia stared at her screen as the notifications rolled in. Her breathing grew shallow. A cold sweat broke out across her neck. She scrambled to delete the comment, but the damage was already migrating. Whispers travel faster than data in Paradise Valley. Desperation clawed at her throat. She abandoned the digital front and resorted to direct confrontation. She dialed the main concierge line for the resort. A polite desk clerk answered the call. Olivia bypassed pleasantries and demanded to be transferred to the event coordination department immediately. She identified herself as the bride, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. The clerk paused. The tapping of a keyboard echoed through the receiver. The clerk returned to the line, her tone shifting from hospitable to rigidly professional. She informed Olivia that the requested date was locked under a commercial privacy seal. Olivia raised her voice, insisting there was a catastrophic administrative error. She demanded Sloan by name. The clerk recited the exact phrase Sloan had armed her with, The text was unyielding. You are not an authorized representative on this account. We cannot confirm or deny any event details, nor can we facilitate communication regarding this date. If you have further inquiries, you must contact the primary contract holder directly. The line went dead. The dial tone hummed in Olivia's ear, a flat, mechanical confirmation of her total powerlessness. While Olivia spiraled into a panic, a secondary skirmish erupted on a different platform. My phone buzzed on my desk. It was a message from Maya containing a rapid succession of screenshots. The images captured a heated exchange inside the private extended family Facebook group. Beatrice had chosen to wage her own war. My mother posted a lengthy, emotional diatribe aimed at my character. She played the victim with masterful precision. She wrote that a certain older sister was using her financial leverage to sabotage a beautiful, innocent wedding out of bitter jealousy. Beatrice called for the family to rally around Olivia during this heartbreaking crisis, attempting to turn the extended relatives into a mob of flying monkeys. Maya did not let the narrative stand for even 10 minutes. The final screenshot showed Maya's response. My cousin did not use emotional rhetoric. She did not hurl insults. She used the cold, heavy weight of the law. Maya typed a structured, highly analytical reply. She cited the specific codes of Arizona commercial lease agreements. She defined the legal concept of a corporate guarantor. She clearly outlined that the $35,000 deposit originated from a registered financial firm, not a personal checking account, rendering the venue a corporate asset. Maya concluded her comment by politely suggesting that Beatrice consult a licensed attorney regarding defamation laws before making further public claims about Harris Financial. The family group chat went dead silent. The aunts and uncles who usually rushed to comfort my mother recognized a legal minefield when they saw one. Beatrice was effectively neutralized, shut down in front of the very audience she sought to manipulate. The walls were closing in on Olivia from every conceivable angle. Her digital facade was crumbling, her mother was silenced, and the venue refused to acknowledge her existence. But the most dangerous threat was sitting right next to her in her own living room. Preston walked into the room holding a glass of scotch. He wore a cashmere sweater and a look of mild irritation. He sat on the edge of the sofa, swirling the amber liquid over the ice. He looked up at Olivia, his expression tightening into a frown. He mentioned that his mother had spent the entire morning trying to reach the event coordinators at the resort. Mrs. Kensington wanted to discuss the floral arrangements and confirm the payment receipts, just as she had promised during the disastrous country club luncheon. Preston stated that the venue staff was refusing to return his mother's calls. He asked Olivia, his voice dripping with condescending suspicion, why a luxury resort would suddenly stonewall one of the most prominent families in the state. Olivia felt the room spin. The air grew thin. Preston was staring at her, waiting for an explanation that made sense of the chaos. If she told him the truth, the engagement would end tonight. He would walk out the door and her ticket to the aristocracy would vanish. She formulated a disastrous lie. The words tumbled out of her mouth before she could weigh the consequences. She forced a light, dismissive laugh, waving her hand as if the issue were a trivial annoyance. She told Preston that the silence was actually a precaution. She spun a frantic tale, claiming the resort was simply upgrading their security protocols because several of the VIP guests on their list required enhanced protection. She insisted the front desk was instructed to halt all unverified communication while the security sweep was conducted, assuring him it was a standard procedure for high-profile events. Preston stopped swirling his drink. He studied her face, his eyes narrowing. He was a man drowning in hidden debt, finely attuned to the scent of a lie, because he lived one every day. He did not challenge her directly, but he issued a quiet ultimatum. He told her she needed to fix the communication blackout by tomorrow. His mother was losing patience, and the lawyers were demanding the vendor paperwork. The fabricated excuse bought Olivia a few fleeting hours of peace, but it forced her hand entirely. She could no longer hide behind a screen or a phone call. The only way to sustain the lie about VIP security upgrades was to produce tangible evidence from the resort itself. She had to breach the barricade. She grabbed her car keys, realizing she had to physically go to the venue and demand access, setting herself on a direct collision course with the very corporate firewall I had engineered. The tires of Olivia's luxury sport utility vehicle crunched over the crushed white gravel of the Sonoran Oasis Resort driveway. The mid-morning sun cast harsh, unforgiving shadows across the adobe architecture. She parked in the circular valet drop-off, leaving the keys in the ignition and tossing a crumpled $20 bill onto the driver's seat. She did not wait for the attendant to open her door. She stepped out into the sweltering heat, her heels striking the flagstone path with a frantic, uneven rhythm. Olivia operated under a specific delusion cultivated by decades of getting her way through sheer persistence. Growing up, Beatrice had trained her to believe that her tears were a currency no one could refuse. Whenever I had earned a commendation or a professional milestone, Olivia only needed to produce a well-timed sulk to redirect our mother's attention and resources back to her. She believed that physical presence amplified this effect on strangers. A phone call could be ignored, an email could be deleted, but a crying, demanding bride standing in a high-end hotel lobby was a public relations hazard. She assumed hospitality staff were trained to pacify distress, regardless of who signed the actual checks. She adjusted her designer sunglasses, took a shallow breath of the dry desert air, and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the main lobby. The air inside was chilled to a crisp 68 degrees, scented with white tea and sage. The lobby was a cathedral of polished travertine and muted desert tones. Olivia bypassed the check-in line and marched directly to the primary concierge desk. A young man in a tailored charcoal suit looked up, offering a practiced, neutral smile. Olivia did not return the greeting. She leaned over the polished mahogany counter, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the edge. She stated her name and demanded immediate access to the main ballroom. She claimed she needed to inspect the floral load-in and verify the seating arrangements for her weekend ceremony. The concierge tapped his keyboard. His eyes flicked across the screen. The hospitality smile faded, replaced by the blank, impenetrable expression of a corporate employee adhering to a strict legal protocol. He informed her that the ballroom was closed for a private event and no unauthorized personnel were permitted past the foyer. Olivia raised her voice, letting the shrill edge of panic seep into her tone. She insisted she was the bride. She demanded that Sloan, the head event coordinator, be brought out instantly to rectify this absurd administrative oversight. The heavy wooden door behind the reception desk opened. Sloan stepped into the lobby. The coordinator wore a structured navy sheath dress and carried a slim leather portfolio. Sloan had spent 15 years managing events for real estate titans and temperamental politicians. She was immune to tantrums. She did not look flustered by the unannounced arrival. She looked like a woman holding a winning hand backed by an airtight legal department. Sloan approached the counter. She did not offer a comforting hug. She did not apologize for the misunderstanding. She placed the leather portfolio on the mahogany surface and flipped it open. Olivia Sloan said, keeping her voice low and even, "You need to lower your voice. You are causing a disturbance in a commercial space." Olivia pointed a shaking finger at the closed ballroom doors down the hall. She ordered Sloan to open them. She spun her fabricated tale about VIP security upgrades, demanding that her mother-in-law be allowed to walk the space tomorrow to satisfy the family attorneys. Sloan did not engage with the fiction. She reached into the portfolio and withdrew a single sheet of heavy bond paper. She slid it across the counter. "This is the master lease for the ballroom," Sloan stated. "The ink at the bottom of the page is the only signature our finance department recognizes." Olivia stared down at the document. The bold black letters spelled out Harris Financial. Her own name was nowhere on the page. "Your sister exercised her right as the sole corporate guarantor to restructure the reservation," Sloan continued, her tone surgical and devoid of pity. "This property is currently operating under a commercial blackout. You are not on the vendor list. You are not on the guest list. As of this moment, you possess no legal right to be on this property." Olivia opened her mouth to argue, but the air seemed to vanish from her lungs. Sloane leaned forward slightly, closing the portfolio. If you do not leave the premises voluntarily, I am legally obligated to issue a formal trespass warning. Our security team will escort you to your vehicle. If you return, local law enforcement will be contacted to process a commercial trespassing violation. The words hung in the chilled air. A trespass warning. The hospitality professional was threatening her with police intervention. The velvet rope had turned into a steel barricade. Olivia took a stumbling step backward. Her gaze drifted past Sloane, looking down the long travertine corridor toward the main ballroom. A pair of catering staff had propped the double doors open to push a heavy transport cart through the threshold. For a fraction of a second, Olivia saw the interior of the room. She did not see the blush pink chiffon drapery she had painstakingly selected months ago. She did not see the towering arrangements of pastel peonies. Instead, she saw a space transformed into a sleek, imposing powerhouse. The tables were draped in rich charcoal linen. In the center of each table sat striking structural arrangements of white orchids and black foliage anchored in heavy emerald glass vases. It looked like a boardroom designed for titans, a visual manifestation of my unyielding authority. The physical reality of the loss struck Olivia with blunt force. Her aesthetic was erased. Her wedding was gone. The venue was stripped of her identity and rebuilt in her sister's image. Olivia turned and fled. She pushed through the glass doors, the scorching midday heat hitting her face like a furnace blast. She practically ran to her vehicle, ignoring the valet attendant who tried to hand her a bottle of water. She climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it. The leather seats burned against her legs. She gripped the steering wheel, her chest heaving. The logical move was to pick up her phone, call Preston, and confess. The venue was lost, the money was gone, the wedding had to be canceled. But confessing meant facing the Kensington family lawyers empty-handed. It meant admitting she was a fraud. Her mind, warped by months of continuous deception, rejected the truth. She convinced herself that the corporate summit was just a temporary hurdle. She believed I was playing a cruel game of chicken, waiting to see who would flinch first. Olivia reached into her designer bag and pulled out her tablet. Her fingers trembled as she opened a document editor. She was not going to surrender. She was going to buy more time. She typed out a pristine, fabricated weekend itinerary. She listed a fake rehearsal dinner time at a local chain restaurant, preparing to justify the downgrade to Preston as a desire for a casual, intimate gathering before the grand ceremony. She noted a specific hour for the Kensington family to arrive at the resort on Saturday evening. She saved the document and attached it to an email addressed to Preston and his mother. Her logic fractured, descending into pure delusion. She formed a new desperate strategy built on emotional blackmail. She would survive the rehearsal dinner. Then, on the evening of the actual event, she would dress in her pearl-encrusted gown. She would arrive at the resort with her entire bridal party, Preston and the aristocratic in-laws in tow. She would orchestrate a grand public confrontation on the marble terrace in front of my elite corporate guests. She reasoned that despite my cold corporate exterior, I would never allow my own sister to be turned away in front of the state's top chief executives. She assumed I would fold to save my firm's reputation. The venue doors would open out of sheer social necessity. Olivia hit send on the email, sealing her own fate. She put the car in gear and pulled out of the resort, driving straight toward the disastrous rehearsal dinner where the final fractures in our family would break wide open. The flickering neon sign of the chain steakhouse cast a sickly red glow across the crowded asphalt. Inside the restaurant, the air hung heavy with the smell of stale fryer grease, spilled beer, and industrial floor cleaner. It was a severe departure from the mahogany and crystal aesthetic the Kensingtons demanded. Olivia had spent the entire afternoon spinning a frantic narrative to justify the location. She claimed she wanted a rustic, down-to-earth atmosphere to contrast the upcoming opulence of the main ceremony. The excuse hung over the dining room thin and deeply unconvincing. Our family and the Kensingtons sat crowded around two sticky laminate tables pushed together in a noisy corner booth. The fluorescent lighting above offered no favors. It highlighted the deep lines of stress etched into Preston's forehead. He wore a tailored cashmere jacket that looked entirely out of place against the cracked vinyl seating. He kept checking his watch, his foot tapping a relentless rhythm against the linoleum floor. Beatrice sat near the head of the table. My mother remained uncharacteristically silent. She was on her third glass of cheap house white wine, gripping the thick glass stem tight enough to snap it. She knew the foundation of this wedding was cracking. David had warned her about my corporate pivot, but her pride refused to let her acknowledge the catastrophe unfolding in front of her. She drank to numb the reality, choosing blind denial over stepping in to stop the collision. Across from Beatrice sat Mrs. Kensington. The older woman did not touch her plate of generic appetizers. She evaluated the sticky table, the noisy patrons, and the sweating groom with the cold precision of a predator sensing weakness. She leaned forward, resting her forearms on the edge of the table. She directed her gaze at Olivia, her voice cutting through the clatter of the restaurant. "This is a rather quaint choice for a rehearsal dinner," Mrs. Kensington noted. Her tone was polite, yet laced with unmistakable venom. "I assumed we would be dining at the country club." Olivia forced a bright, brittle smile. "The country club is so stuffy," she replied, her voice pitching slightly too high. "We wanted something fun and relaxed before the formal events tomorrow." The waiter arrived, interrupting the tension. He placed a black plastic tray containing the preliminary bill in front of Preston. Preston reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved a heavy metal credit card. He placed it on the tray with a practiced flourish, attempting to project casual wealth. The waiter produced a handheld payment terminal. He inserted the card. The machine hummed for a few seconds before emitting a sharp, negative beep. A red light flashed on the screen. Preston laughed a hollow, nervous sound. He pulled the card out, rubbed the microchip against his tailored sleeve, and handed it back. "Just a read error," he muttered. The waiter inserted the card a second time. The machine processed, then beeped again. Declined. The silence that fell over the table was suffocating. Beatrice looked down at her wine. Mrs. Kensington raised an eyebrow, staring directly at her son. Preston felt the heat rush to his face. He asked the waiter to swipe the magnetic strip instead. The waiter swiped the card. The machine hummed a third time, finally emitting a soft green chime of approval. Preston exhaled a breath he had been holding for a full minute. He tried to steer the conversation back to safe territory, but the damage was irreversible. The facade of unlimited generational wealth had slipped, exposing the terrifying financial reality underneath. Maya sat near the center of the table, watching the performance with clinical detachment. My cousin thrived in environments where lies intersected with logistics. She rested her chin on her folded hands and locked her gaze on Olivia. Maya did not shout. She did not express anger. She utilized the most dangerous weapon in her arsenal. She asked a specific logistical question. "Olivia," Maya said, keeping her voice conversational, "I was wondering about the load-in schedule for tomorrow. What time is Sloan expecting the florist to arrive at the ballroom?" Olivia did not flinch. Her pathological capacity for deception activated instantly. She wove a seamless, detailed lie right there at the table. She claimed the vendors were scheduled for a 10 o'clock arrival. She stated she had spoken with Sloan that very afternoon to finalize the placement of the blush peonies and the chiffon draping. She described a secondary security sweep requested by the resort to accommodate the Kensington family VIPs. It was a flawless performance, delivered without a single stutter. David sat beside Maya. He listened to his sister construct an alternate reality out of thin air. He remembered the certified bankruptcy filings on my kitchen island. He remembered the fake designer handbag. He remembered the corporate contract proving the venue belonged entirely to Harris Financial. The dedicated peacemaker within my brother finally snapped. David pushed his chair back. The metal legs scraped loudly against the linoleum. He stood up, towering over the cramped booth. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He dropped the cash onto the sticky table right next to Preston's empty plate. "I cannot do this," David said. His voice was low, carrying a profound, weary sadness. Olivia looked up, her fake smile faltering. "David, what are you doing? Sit down. The food is arriving soon." "I am stepping down," David replied. He did not yell. The quiet nature of his resignation made it carry twice the impact. I am not standing at an altar tomorrow to support a lie. You need professional help, Olivia, and you need it before this delusion destroys whatever is left of your life. He turned away from the table. Maya stood up immediately, offering a polite, chilling nod to Mrs. Kensington. She linked her arm through David's, and the two of them walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Their departure left a massive vacuum at the table. Beatrice closed her eyes, refusing to watch her son walk out the door. Mrs. Kensington seized the moment of chaos to press her advantage. She turned her predatory gaze back to Olivia. "Your brother's exit was highly unusual," Mrs. Kensington observed. "And since we are on the topic of unusual logistics, I have not yet received the physical vendor receipts you promised me at the luncheon. Our attorneys are halting the finalization of the prenuptial agreement until those documents are in my hands." Olivia felt the room spin. The smell of fried food turned her stomach. She stammered another excuse, promising the paperwork was in her travel bag back at the hotel. She swore Mrs. Kensington would have everything by breakfast. The remainder of the dinner passed in excruciating, strained silence. The moment the plates were cleared, the party fractured. Beatrice ordered a rideshare, citing a sudden migraine, desperate to escape the sinking ship. Mrs. Kensington departed in a black town car, her posture rigid with suspicion. Olivia walked out into the muggy night air, her heels clicking against the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. She headed toward her sport utility vehicle, hoping to drive back to her hotel and hide. Preston intercepted her before she could reach the driver's side door. He stepped into her path, blocking her escape. The sodium vapor lamps cast harsh, ugly shadows across his face. The aristocratic mask he wore for his mother was gone. He looked like a cornered, terrified man facing imminent financial execution. He did not raise his voice, but the intensity of his demand cut through the humid air. He told her the excuses had run their course. The declined credit card at dinner had pushed his mother over the edge. The lawyers were demanding the physical venue contract signed by the resort management. "I need to see the master lease," Preston demanded. "I need the payment confirmations. My mother is threatening to cancel the entire arrangement if she does not have physical proof of your equity by tomorrow morning." Olivia backed up against the door of her vehicle. Her mind raced, searching for an exit strategy that did not exist. If she confessed the truth right now, Preston would walk away, taking her aristocratic fantasy with him. She looked at the desperate man standing in front of her and made the worst calculation of her life. "I have the documents in my email," Olivia lied, her voice shaking just enough to mimic genuine exhaustion. "I will print them out at the Hotel Business Center. You will have the physical contract in your hands first thing tomorrow morning. I swear it." Preston stared at her for a long, calculating moment. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. He turned and walked away toward his own vehicle, leaving her alone in the dim parking lot. Olivia unlocked her car and climbed inside. She gripped the steering wheel, her chest heaving as panic finally consumed her. She had promised a physical contract she did not possess. She had 12 hours before the sun came up. She could not access the resort portal. She could not call me. She had only one option left. She started the engine, her mind turning toward digital forgery, unaware that her final, desperate maneuver would seal her fate in front of the most powerful executives in the state. The fluorescent bulb in the Hotel Business Center flickered, casting a sickly pale light across the industrial carpet. It was 2 a.m. Olivia sat alone in the cramped, windowless room, hunched over a public computer terminal. The air smelled of stale coffee and ozone. She logged into her personal email account, her fingers slipping against the greasy plastic keyboard. She retrieved an old, legitimate bank statement from 3 years ago, a month when our mother had gifted her a substantial sum for a European vacation. She downloaded the document and opened a rudimentary PDF editing application. Olivia was not a forensic accountant. She possessed no technical expertise. Her entire strategy relied on the assumption that wealth insulated people from scrutiny, that Preston and his mother would simply glance at the total amount and hand the paper back. She dragged a white digital box over the old transaction history. She typed in the name of the Sonoran Oasis Resort. She altered the date to reflect a transaction from 3 weeks prior. Then she typed out the sum of $35,000. Her hands shook so violently she misspelled the word thousand on her first attempt. She corrected the error, her breath hitching in the quiet room. She changed the origin account to reflect her non-existent trust fund. To the untrained eye, the resulting document looked like a standard financial receipt. But underneath the surface, it was a catastrophic mess. She failed to align the margins properly. The font size for the altered text was a fraction of a millimeter larger than the original bank typography. Most damning of all, she possessed no knowledge of digital metadata. The timestamp embedded in the file code clearly indicated the document had been generated at 2 a.m. on the day of the wedding, not 3 weeks ago. She hit the print command. The heavy commercial printer hummed to life, spitting out a single sheet of warm paper. Olivia snatched it from the tray. She folded the forgery perfectly in half, clutching it against her chest as she walked back to her suite. She convinced herself the lie was flawless. 7 hours later, the Arizona sun rose, baking the desert in a fierce, dry heat. Preston waited in the lobby of her hotel. He wore a casual linen suit, but the fabric hung loosely on his frame. The dark circles under his eyes betrayed a sleepless night. He paced the marble floor, checking his luxury watch every 30 seconds. Olivia stepped out of the elevator. She wore a silk robe, attempting to project the calm, glowing aura of a relaxed bride on her wedding morning. She walked straight up to him and handed over the folded sheet of paper. Preston unfolded the document. He stared at the printed ink. The lobby was quiet, save for the soft trickling of a decorative water fountain. Olivia held her breath, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Preston was not a financial genius, but he spent his life reviewing trust disbursements and loan extensions. He recognized the slight pixelation around the venue name. He saw that the dates did not line up perfectly with the baseline text. He knew instantly and undeniably that he was holding a fabricated receipt. The document was a fraud, which meant the bride standing in front of him possessed no actual capital. A normal man would have dropped the paper, called off the ceremony, and walked away. But Preston was a cornered animal. If he exposed Olivia, the wedding would shatter today. His mother would demand a full accounting of their own finances to manage the public relations fallout. His hidden offshore debts would be dragged into the daylight. The Kensington estate would face immediate foreclosure. He needed this marriage to proceed, even if it was built on a foundation of cheap printer paper. Preston folded the document precisely along the original crease. He slid it into the breast pocket of his jacket. He looked at Olivia, his expression a carefully constructed mask of relief. "This is perfect," Preston said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I will show this to my mother and the attorneys. It will satisfy their requirements. Get dressed. I will see you at the venue." He turned and walked out of the sliding glass doors. The mutual delusion reached its terrifying apex. They had both stared directly at a glaring lie and chose to embrace it, marching forward toward a ceremony that neither of them had actually secured. While Olivia returned to her suite to begin her extensive hair and makeup routine, a vastly different kind of analysis was taking place across the city. Maya sat in her pristine home office. The morning light streamed through the wooden blinds, illuminating her multi-monitor workstation. Maya did not rely on basic editing software. She utilized proprietary corporate auditing network systems designed to pierce the corporate veils of international tax havens. She had spent the entire night tracing the convoluted financial architecture of the Kensington Holding Company. Her screen displayed a web of shell corporations, offshore trusts, and defaulted promissory notes. She tracked the trail of debt directly to a centralized legal filing in the Cayman Islands. Maya hit the final keystroke. The server returned a certified, unredacted PDF document. It was the official Chapter 11 bankruptcy petition for the primary Kensington estate. The document detailed a catastrophic insolvency, listing liabilities that dwarfed their remaining assets by a factor of 10. The aristocratic family was not just struggling, they were legally and permanently broke. The filing included a sworn affidavit signed by Preston himself, verifying his complete lack of liquid capital. Maya downloaded the explosive file. She did not draft a long emotional message. She attached the PDF to a secure email and sent it directly to my encrypted inbox. Her subject line contained only 2 words: checkmate. Confirmed. I stood in the expansive walk-in closet of my Foothills home when the notification chimed. I picked up my phone and opened the attachment. The harsh legal language of the bankruptcy filing scrolled across my screen. The final piece of the puzzle locked into place. I possessed the ultimate trump card. I had the physical contract proving ownership of the venue, and I now held the legal documentation proving the groom was a destitute fraud. I set the phone down and turned to the full-length mirror. I slipped my arms into the custom emerald blazer. The heavy silk lining felt cool against my skin. I fastened the double-breasted buttons. The sharp, structured shoulders projected absolute authority. I did not look like a bitter, uninvited sister. I looked like the chief executive of a thriving financial empire. I collected my leather dispatch bag containing the master venue lease and a printed copy of Maya's audit. I drove to the Sonoran Oasis Resort. The transition was already complete. The valet attendants wore black uniforms featuring the Harris Financial crest. The entrance was flanked by towering arrangements of white orchids and dark structural foliage. I walked through the glass doors into the main lobby. The pastel wedding aesthetic was entirely eradicated, replaced by a sleek, imposing corporate atmosphere. Sloan met me at the reception desk. She held a digital tablet displaying the finalized guest list. She informed me that the security perimeter was fully established. She had contracted 3 additional private security officers to manage the main gates. They were instructed to cross-reference every arriving vehicle with the corporate registry. Anyone lacking an executive credential was to be turned away at the property line. I walked down the travertine corridor and pushed open the double doors to the main ballroom. The space was breathtaking. The charcoal linens draped perfectly over the tables. The jazz quintet was currently setting up their instruments on the main stage, running through a smooth, low-tempo sound check. The catering staff moved with silent efficiency, placing crystal glassware and silver flatware at every setting. The room radiated power, wealth, and undeniable reality. I stood at the center of the ballroom looking out through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. Beyond the glass, the resort driveway stretched out toward the main security gates. 10 miles away, Olivia was stepping into her $10,000 gown. Preston was tying his bespoke silk bow tie. They were gathering their aristocratic in-laws, their bewildered bridal party, and 150 guests. They were organizing a massive motorcade, preparing to drive across the desert to claim a venue they did not own. The trap was perfectly, irreversibly set. The corporate wall was fortified. I checked the time on my watch. The sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the asphalt. The elite titans of Arizona commerce were scheduled to arrive in exactly 1 hour. Olivia's bridal procession was scheduled to arrive at the exact same moment. The impending collision was no longer a possibility. It was a logistical certainty. The Arizona sun dipped toward the jagged horizon, painting the Sonoran Desert in deep shades of burnt orange and vibrant violet. The golden hour had arrived. The harsh heat of the afternoon surrendered to a cool, dry twilight. Outside the main entrance of the resort, the crushed white gravel driveway transformed into a runway of mechanical luxury. Sleek black town cars, imported sedans, and custom utility vehicles pulled into the circular drop-off zone in a steady, synchronized rhythm. The valet attendants, clad in dark uniforms bearing the Harris Financial crest, moved with practiced efficiency. They opened heavy doors, welcoming the most influential commercial titans in the state. Inside the main ballroom, the atmosphere was a masterclass in calculated opulence. The pastel wedding aesthetic had been eradicated down to the atomic level. The space now radiated a dark, sophisticated authority. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the desert sunset, bathing the room in natural amber light. The tables were draped in heavy charcoal linen. Structural centerpieces of white orchids and dark foliage rose from the center of each table, anchored in thick emerald glass. The air carried the rich, complex scent of seared Wagyu beef, toasted oak from the bourbon tasting bar, and the crisp finish of chilled vintage champagne. On the main stage, the 5-piece jazz ensemble delivered a smooth, rhythmic melody. The music was present, but unobtrusive, providing a sophisticated baseline for the low hum of high-stakes networking. I navigated the room in my custom emerald blazer. The heavy raw silk moved flawlessly with every step. I did not hold a clipboard. I did not look over my shoulder. I held a crystal flute of sparkling water, greeting my clients with the quiet certainty of a woman who owned every square inch of the floor beneath her feet. I exchanged handshakes with real estate developers and software pioneers. They offered congratulations on my recent quarterly acquisitions. They spoke to me as a peer, an equal player in an arena where fortunes were forged through verified data and ruthless strategy. Then I noticed the specific faction I had meticulously curated for this exact evening. Grouped near the Bourbon Bar were several prominent figures from the Paradise Valley Country Club. These were the women who sat on the same exclusive charity boards as Preston's mother. They wore understated designer jewelry and carried authentic leather handbags that required a 5-year wait list. They were the gatekeepers of the aristocratic society Olivia was actively destroying her life to enter. I watched the president of the local Heritage Foundation take a sip of her aged bourbon. She caught my eye across the room and offered a slow, respectful nod. Her companions turned, raising their glasses slightly in my direction. The gesture was small, but the implication was seismic. They were standing inside the very venue Preston claimed for his lavish nuptials, drinking my alcohol, eating my food, and validating my status. The social dominance was undeniable. Preston's world actually belonged to me. The aristocratic peers he was desperate to impress were currently marveling at the structural integrity of my corporate empire. Near the front of the stage, I found David and Maya standing beside a tall cocktail table. My brother looked entirely transformed. The heavy, exhausted slump that had plagued his posture for months was gone. He wore a crisp, dark suit without a tie, projecting a relaxed, unburdened demeanor. By walking out of that toxic rehearsal dinner, he had shed the suffocating weight of our mother's endless emotional demands. He held the glass of scotch, smiling as he conversed with the chief financial officer of a local hospital network. He looked 10 years younger. Maya stood beside him, radiating her own distinct brand of power. She wore a tailored crimson dress that contrasted sharply with the charcoal decor. Her dark hair was swept into a flawless knot. She surveyed the room with the clinical, calculating gaze of a forensic auditor. She saw the exact value of every object, every interaction, and every hidden motive. We shared a brief glance. No words were exchanged, but her slight smile confirmed what we both knew. The trap was holding perfectly. The financial reality we had unearthed was now a physical fortress. The jazz quintet brought their current arrangement to a smooth, lingering close. The soft hum of conversation lowered as a hushed anticipation rippled through the crowd. I set my crystal glass on a passing waiter's tray. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking against the polished hardwood floor. The room fell entirely silent as I stepped up to the microphone. I looked out over the sea of influential faces. I saw the country club matriarchs. I saw the tech founders. I saw my brother finally breathing free air. Welcome to the Harris Financial Desert Summit, I began, my voice echoing clearly through the pristine acoustic space. A polite wave of applause washed over the room. I waited for silence to return before continuing. We gathered tonight to celebrate the principles that sustain true growth, I said, keeping my tone measured and precise. In our industry, we constantly evaluate portfolios. We look for hidden liabilities. We search for toxic debt masked by clever marketing. We all know the danger of a beautiful facade built on a hollow foundation. An empire constructed on borrowed capital, on fabricated projections, will always crumble under the weight of a single, undeniable truth. I paused, letting the words hang in the amber light. I saw the country club executives nodding in profound agreement. The thematic parallel was sharp and deliberate. I was talking about corporate acquisitions, but I was also delivering the eulogy for my sister's fraudulent marriage. Authentic wealth requires structural integrity. I continued my gaze sweeping across the room. It requires the courage to look at the raw data, to refuse the comfort of a comfortable lie, and to build something that can actually withstand a storm. Tonight, we celebrate the partnerships forged in reality. We celebrate the strength of verified foundations. Thank you for your continued trust in this firm. Please enjoy the evening. The applause that followed was not merely polite. It was robust, resounding, and filled with deep professional respect. I stepped down from the stage, the jazz ensemble instantly launching into a lively, upbeat tempo. The energy in the room crackled. The attendees returned to their networking, their conversations now fueled by the commanding tone I had just set. I walked toward the side exit of the ballroom, intending to check the catering timeline with the kitchen staff. Before I reached the swinging doors, I saw Sloane moving rapidly down the peripheral corridor. The event coordinator was not walking with her usual graceful glide. Her stride was urgent, her posture rigid. She held a hand pressed firmly against the translucent earpiece coiled around her ear. She navigated through a cluster of waiters, her eyes locked onto mine. The professional calm she wore like a uniform was fracturing around the edges. I stepped into the alcove, shielding our interaction from the main floor. Sloane reached me, dropping her hand from her ear. She took a short, sharp breath. "They are here," Sloane said. Her voice was a tight, controlled whisper. I looked toward the heavy double doors leading to the main foyer. Who exactly is here? Sloane tapped her digital tablet, pulling up the live feed from the perimeter security cameras. She turned the screen toward me. The security team just radioed from the lower checkpoint, Sloane reported. A massive motorcade breached the initial turnoff. 6 black transport vehicles, a stretch limousine, and a dozen passenger cars. They are currently gridlocking the main entry lane. The lead driver is refusing to present a corporate credential. I stared at the glowing screen. The grainy night vision footage showed the imposing grille of a white luxury limousine idling aggressively against the lowered security gate. Behind it stretched a long, chaotic line of vehicles carrying the Kensington family, the bewildered bridal party, and 150 wedding guests expecting a pastel ceremony. The golden hour was over. The sky outside the windows had turned a deep, bruised purple. The inevitable collision we had mapped out in offshore bank filings and forged receipts had finally arrived at the front door. Olivia had orchestrated her bridal procession, driving her entire fabricated life straight into an impenetrable wall of corporate security. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald blazer. I instructed Sloane to hold the ballroom doors closed and to keep the jazz music playing. I turned away from the sanctuary of my successful summit and began the long walk down the travertine corridor toward the front lobby, ready to meet the wreckage on the asphalt. The heavy glass doors slid open, trading the cool, climate-controlled air of the resort for the thick, lingering heat of the Arizona twilight. I stepped onto the marble terrace overlooking the lower parking lot. The scene unfolding on the crushed white gravel below mirrored the exact disaster I had anticipated. A gridlock of luxury vehicles jammed the primary access lane. The white stretch limousine idled at the front, its bright headlights cutting through the dusk, illuminating the blockade of unyielding corporate security guards. 150 wedding guests spilled out of their passenger cars. They stood on the hot asphalt in their pastel chiffon dresses and summer suits, fanning their faces with useless paper programs. They murmured among themselves, shifting uncomfortably, as the grand aristocratic celebration they expected dissolved into a humiliating roadside standoff. Right at the center of the barricade stood my sister. Olivia was encased in $10,000 of heavy, pearl-encrusted silk. The desert wind snapped her bridal veil sideways, tangling the delicate tulle around her face. She screamed at the impassive guards, her voice cracking under the strain of total panic. Her makeup ran in dark tracks down her cheeks. The security officer stepped forward, offering a brief flicker of professional pity. He reached into his breast pocket and handed her a cocktail napkin. Olivia snatched the paper to wipe her eyes. She froze. She stared down at the thick cream stock, her gaze locking onto the deeply embossed emerald foil crest. Harris Financial. The physical proof of her dispossession rested right in the palm of her hand. The venue did not belong to her. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. She looked up, her tear-streaked face lifting toward the terrace, and her eyes met mine. Before Olivia could hurl another desperate plea toward the balcony, the crowd parted. A figure dressed in a tailored ivory suit marched toward the front of the barricade, her heels striking the pavement with rhythmic, terrifying precision. It was Mrs. Kensington. Preston's mother possessed a lifelong habit of bending the world to her will through sheer intimidation. She bypassed the weeping bride entirely, viewing Olivia's emotional collapse as an embarrassing display of low-class fragility. Mrs. Kensington stopped inches from the primary security guard. She did not yell. She raised her chin, her gaze drifting up to the marble terrace where I stood, wrapped in my emerald blazer. Jacintha, the older woman, called out. Her voice carried the sharp, carrying resonance of a woman used to barking orders across country club dining rooms. This stunt has gone far enough. Instruct these hired thugs to open the gates immediately. We have a schedule to maintain, and the legal teams will handle whatever petty financial dispute you are attempting to leverage here. I rested my hands on the cool stone balustrade. I looked down at the woman who had spent the last 3 weeks demanding financial purity from my sister, projecting an aura of untouchable generational wealth. I did not issue a command to the guards. I did not defend myself. I simply stepped aside. The heavy glass doors behind me hissed open once more. Maya stepped onto the terrace. My cousin wore a tailored crimson dress that caught the fading light. Her posture was flawless. She carried a thick, leather-bound dossier tucked under her arm. Maya operated in a world governed by verified data, impervious to the social intimidation Mrs. Kensington wielded like a weapon. Maya did not stay on the balcony. She descended the wide marble staircase, her steps deliberate and unhurried. The murmuring crowd fell silent, their collective attention tracking the woman in red as she approached the barricade. The security guards parted, allowing Maya to step through the line. She stopped directly in front of Mrs. Kensington. The contrast was striking. The aging socialite clinging to the remnants of a fabricated aristocracy faced a forensic auditor armed with irrefutable facts. Maya did not offer a polite greeting. She unzipped the leather portfolio, she withdrew a neatly bound folder, and extended it toward Preston's mother. I believe your attorneys requested physical documentation regarding the vendor payments, Maya stated. Her tone was clinical, carrying the crisp, detached cadence of a boardroom audit. We felt it was necessary to deliver the records directly to you, considering the bride is unable to produce them. Mrs. Kensington narrowed her eyes. She snatched the folder, flipping open the heavy cardstock cover. The first page is the master lease for this property, Maya explained, pitching her voice loud enough for the front rows of guests to hear every syllable. You will notice the signatory is Harris Financial. Jacintha provided the $35,000 deposit 3 weeks ago. Olivia possesses no equity here. She has been locked out of the corporate portal since Tuesday. Mrs. Kensington stared at the bold ink. A tight white line formed around her lips. She turned the page. The second section details the rejected wire transfers and the declined credit card authorizations attempted by your son Maya continued. The data proves Preston lacked the liquid capital to secure even the catering minimums. Mrs. Kensington's hands began to tremble. The pristine ivory fabric of her suit seemed to lose its structural stiffness. She flipped to the final tab in the folder. The third document is a certified copy of a Chapter 11 petition filed in the Cayman Islands. Maya delivered the final, devastating blow. The primary Kensington holding company is insolvent. The estate is buried under mezzanine debt. Your family is facing immediate asset liquidation. A suffocating silence descended upon the crushed gravel. The sound of idling engines felt deafening. Every eye in the crowd turned toward Preston. The groom stood paralyzed near the front bumper of the white limousine. The color vanished from his face, leaving his skin the shade of wet ash. A cold sweat beaded along his hairline. His bespoke tuxedo suddenly looked like a borrowed costume. Preston watched his mother read the sworn legal affidavit bearing his own signature, the document verifying his total lack of liquid funds. His knees buckled slightly, a subtle, involuntary surrender to gravity. The intricate, desperate con he had engineered to save his status was now exposed under the harsh glare of 100 headlights. Mrs. Kensington lowered the folder. She did not look at Maya. She slowly turned her head to look at her son, her eyes wide with a mixture of raw horror and profound humiliation. The illusion of her untouchable superiority shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. She had demanded a wealthy heiress for a daughter-in-law, only to discover her own son was a destitute fraud. The realization triggered a primal, vicious reaction. Mrs. Kensington pivoted away from Preston and launched her fury at the easiest target. She pointed a trembling, diamond-adorned finger at Olivia. "You lied to me," Mrs. Kensington shrieked, all pretense of country club elegance evaporating into the desert air. "You penniless gold digger, you dragged my family to a locked door to hide your own poverty." The insult echoed across the pavement. The words struck Beatrice like a physical jolt. My mother had spent the entire evening numb with denial, clinging to the hope that the Kensington prestige would somehow rescue the situation. Hearing her favorite daughter publicly branded a gold digger by a bankrupt socialite severed the final thread of her restraint. Beatrice surged forward, pushing past a bewildered groomsman. Her silver hair flew out of its perfect styling. She stepped right into Mrs. Kensington's personal space. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way?" Beatrice snarled, her voice thick with venom. "Your son is the fraud. He is a pathetic, broke imposter hunting for a bailout. You are nothing but common beggars wearing expensive suits." The two matriarchs clashed on the hot asphalt, trading vicious insults in front of the entire assembly. The polished veneer of both families burned to the ground in a matter of seconds. The wedding party fractured into total chaos. Groomsmen stepped back, whispering furiously among themselves. Bridesmaids covered their mouths, their eyes darting between the screaming mothers and the frozen groom. Guests began pulling out their phones, capturing the high society implosion in real time. The crowd fragmented. People turned their backs on the blockade, marching toward their parked cars. Engines revved as drivers desperately tried to maneuver out of the gridlocked lane, eager to escape the radioactive fallout. Olivia stood alone in the center of the maelstrom. The heavy silk gown dragged in the dirt. She looked at Preston, the man she had destroyed her relationship with me to secure. He did not meet her gaze. He stared at the pavement, a broken, empty vessel. I watched the entire spectacle from the marble terrace, the cool crystal glass resting in my hand. The $35,000 had purchased exactly what I intended. The liars were locked outside, tearing each other apart in the dust, while my corporate empire thrived behind the glass. The harsh glare of headlights cut through the gathering dark, illuminating the thick cloud of dust kicked up by 100 panicking guests. The lower parking lot of the resort had devolved into a frantic evacuation zone. Engines revved, tires spun against the crushed white gravel. The carefully constructed facade of the Kensington wedding lay in ruins, and nobody wanted to be caught standing in the blast radius. Down on the asphalt, the vicious shouting match between the two matriarchs abruptly lost its momentum. Mrs. Kensington, realizing she was engaging in a public screaming match with a woman she now viewed as a destitute fraud, snapped her mouth shut. She adjusted her ivory jacket, shot one final look of pure disgust at her son, and marched toward her waiting town car. The driver opened the door, and she vanished into the leather interior, fleeing the scene of her family's ultimate humiliation. Her departure left Beatrice standing alone in the center of the swirling exhaust fumes. My mother lowered her arms, her chest heaving. The adrenaline that had fueled her fierce defense of Olivia began to evaporate, leaving behind a cold, horrifying clarity. Beatrice had spent her entire adult life navigating the precarious ladders of social status. She grew up in a modest household, the daughter of a pragmatic accountant, and she had married into middle-class comfort. But comfort was never enough. She craved elite validation. She viewed her children as investments, vehicles to transport her into the gated communities and charity boardrooms she desperately wanted to inhabit. For years, she had calculated that Olivia, with her bright smile and willingness to play the traditional socialite, was the winning ticket. She had poured her energy, her favoritism, and her loyalty into my sister, actively suppressing my achievements to ensure Olivia's narrative remained front and center. Now standing in the lingering heat of the desert night, Beatrice performed a rapid, devastating mental audit. Preston was bankrupt. The Kensington aristocratic dynasty was a mirage built on toxic offshore debt. Olivia had no trust fund, no leverage, and no venue. My sister was standing 10 feet away, weeping uncontrollably into a dirty silk gown exposed as a counterfeit social climber. The investment had crashed. The stock was worthless. Beatrice slowly turned her head. Her gaze bypassed the fleeing wedding guests and traveled up the wide limestone staircase. She looked at the marble terrace. She looked at me. I stood under the warm amber glow of the resort's exterior lighting. The custom emerald blazer fit flawlessly, a visual testament to unyielding authority. Behind me, the heavy glass doors revealed the interior of the main ballroom. The silhouettes of Arizona's most powerful commercial titans moved gracefully through the space, sipping vintage champagne while the jazz ensemble played a smooth, unbroken rhythm. Real wealth, real power, verified status. The mathematical reality crashed over Beatrice. The elite world she had sacrificed everything to reach was not located at the altar with Preston. It was located behind the corporate firewall I had built. She had spent decades backing the wrong daughter. Survival instinct took over. Beatrice smoothed the front of her wrinkled linen suit. She tucked a stray strand of silver hair behind her ear, attempting to piece her shattered dignity back together. She turned her back on Olivia, ignoring the sobbing bride entirely. She began to walk toward the terrace. She climbed the marble stairs. The physical effort was evident. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, and her steps lacked their usual commanding rhythm. She reached the top of the landing and stopped a few feet from where I stood. The scent of her expensive floral perfume, now soured by sweat and desperation, drifted through the dry air. Jacintha Beatrice said, her voice dropping into a hushed, conspiratorial whisper. She forced a strained, artificial smile, attempting to rewrite history right there on the balcony. Thank goodness you stepped in. That entire family is nothing but common trash. The things that woman just said to me were unforgivable. We need to go inside. Let us step into your event and get away from this circus. She took a step forward, reaching out as if to link her arm through mine. She wanted to walk into the gala on my arm. She intended to mingle with my high-net-worth clients, drink my top-shelf bourbon, and pretend she had been on my side the entire time. She wanted to use my corporate summit to launder her ruined reputation. I did not step back. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked down at her outstretched hand until she slowly, awkwardly lowered it to her side. I felt the cool condensation on the crystal glass in my hand. For the first time in my life, looking at my mother did not trigger a desperate childhood urge to translate her cruelty into something acceptable. I did not feel the need to shrink myself to accommodate her comfort. The hollow ache in my chest was gone, replaced by the solid, unshakable foundation of my own making. Your ticket expired, I stated. The words were flat, carrying the clinical finality of a closed ledger. Beatrice blinked, the artificial smile fracturing. Jacintha, please. I am your mother. You cannot leave me standing out here in this mess. Think of how it looks. I can help you entertain your guests. I belong in that room. You belong exactly where your choices placed you, I replied. I held her gaze, refusing to let her look away. For 20 years you demanded that I finance your illusions while you treated me like a disposable utility. You enabled Olivia's delusion because it served your social ambitions. You stood in my kitchen and faked a medical emergency to force me to surrender my assets to a man who secretly despised our family. You chose your side. Jacintha, that was a misunderstanding, she stammered, her eyes darting toward the glass doors, desperate for entry. I was only trying to keep the peace. Peace is just another word for surrender, I said. I am no longer translating your abuse. I am no longer absorbing the cost of your vanity. The boundaries are drawn and they are not negotiable. You are not walking through those doors tonight, nor will you walk through the doors of my home ever again." The color drained from Beatrice's face. The harsh truth offered no loopholes, no emotional leverage she could exploit. She stared at me, realizing the bridge was not merely burned, it was pulverized. She had permanently alienated the only stable, successful person in her lineage. A quiet rustle of fabric announced movement to my left. Maya stepped out from the shadows of the terrace overhang. My brother David stood beside her. Beatrice saw her son. A fresh wave of desperate hope washed over her features. "David," she pleaded, her voice cracking, "tell your sister to be reasonable. We are a family. We must stick together during a crisis." David looked at the woman who had spent his entire life forcing him to mediate her toxic demands. He looked at her ruined linen suit, her disheveled hair, and the transparent calculation in her eyes. He did not argue with her. He did not offer a comforting excuse. He offered nothing but a profound, weary silence. Maya stepped forward. She placed a gentle, guiding hand on David's forearm. She offered Beatrice a polite, chilling nod, the kind of acknowledgement a seasoned auditor gives to a closed file. "Let us go back inside," Maya said softly to David. "The tasting menu is being served." David broke eye contact with his mother. He turned around, following Maya back toward the sanctuary of the ballroom. The heavy glass doors slid open, releasing a brief wave of cool air and smooth jazz, then hissed shut, sealing the perimeter tight. Beatrice stood alone on the marble landing. She turned her head, looking through the thick, soundproof glass. She watched her son take a glass of champagne from a passing tray. She watched me turn my back on her and walk away, moving effortlessly into a world of verified wealth and genuine respect. She was trapped on the wrong side of the firewall, an exile in the desert night. Down below, the evacuation was nearly complete. The last few passenger vehicles navigated around the idling limousine, their tires crunching loudly over the gravel. The guests kept their heads down, embarrassed, and eager to escape the radioactive fallout of the shattered marriage. The taillights faded down the long resort driveway, leaving the lower lot empty, save for the scattered debris of discarded programs and crushed floral arrangements. Standing in the center of the dust, bathed in the harsh glare of the limousine headlights, were Olivia and Preston. The shared delusion that had bound them together was dead, replaced by the raw, vicious reality of their mutual ruin. The bride gripped the heavy silk of her $10,000 gown, her voice echoing off the limestone walls as she shrieked insults at the destitute groom. Preston shouted back, his face twisted in rage, blaming her for the public execution of his aristocratic standing. The bitter sound of their war drifted up into the night sky, a fitting soundtrack for the empire they had built on sand. The heavy glass doors hissed shut behind me, severing the chaotic sounds of the lower parking lot. I stood in the quiet vestibule for a fraction of a second, letting the chilled, conditioned air cool the warmth of the desert night from my skin. Society trains women to absorb the damage caused by their families. We are taught to build bridges over burning rivers, to carry the weight of our mother's vanity, and to feel a deep, suffocating guilt when we finally refuse to play along. I waited for that familiar, heavy ache to arrive. I waited for the phantom pain of a daughter who had just exiled her own mother to the asphalt. It never came. Instead, my chest expanded. The air in my lungs felt lighter, scrubbed clean of the decades-long obligation to shrink myself into a palatable shape. The final remnant of familial guilt evaporated into the chilled air, leaving behind a profound structural peace. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald blazer, squared my shoulders, and stepped back onto the main floor. The jazz quintet was transitioning into a lively, upbeat tempo, the brass notes bouncing crisply off the high ceiling. The energy in the room had shifted during my brief absence. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a clear, unobstructed vantage point of the driveway below. The high net worth clients attending the summit possessed sharp, observant eyes. They had witnessed the endless motorcade. They had seen the frantic bride pounding on the barricades and the standoff under the streetlights. They knew a severe crisis had knocked on the front door. But they also saw the door remain locked. In the ruthless world of wealth management, clients do not value sentimentality. They value protection. They value a fortress. Watching me draw a hard, impenetrable boundary against my own blood confirmed my capabilities in the best possible way. A consultant who refuses to compromise her corporate assets for a weeping relative is a consultant who will guard a client's financial portfolio with lethal precision. As I walked through the tables, the atmosphere shifted from polite networking to genuine reverence. The handshakes grew firmer. The nods of respect carried a new, distinct weight. I had not just hosted a gala. I had demonstrated live, unyielding crisis management. The evening flowed flawlessly toward its scheduled conclusion. Waiters cleared the dessert plates, replacing them with crystal flutes of vintage champagne. I walked to the front of the stage one last time. The room quieted organically, the low hum of conversation fading as the attendees turned their attention toward the microphone. I raised my glass. The amber light caught the rising trails of carbonation. "We spend our lives deciding where to allocate our resources," I said, my voice carrying clear and steady across the room. "We invest in commercial properties in emerging markets and the promises of new technology. But the most critical asset any of us can acquire is clarity. A balance sheet that hides nothing, a foundation built on verified data rather than comfortable fiction." I looked out at the faces of the commercial titans, the real estate developers, and the society gatekeepers. "Tonight we celebrate the strength required to demand facts," I continued. "We celebrate the courage to walk away from bad investments, no matter how much shared history is attached to them. Here is to partnerships forged in reality, and to investments that yield truth." The attendees raised their glasses in perfect unison. The toast resonated through the ballroom, followed by a robust, sustained applause that shook the floorboards. As I stepped off the stage, a tall man with silver hair and a tailored charcoal suit intercepted my path. It was Richard Sterling, the chief executive officer of the largest commercial real estate trust in the Southwest. He had spent the entire evening observing the perimeter, the luxury, and the undeniable control I wielded over the venue. He extended his hand. "Your handling of the perimeter tonight was exceptional," Richard said, his tone dropping into a serious, professional register. "I prefer partners who do not let emotion dictate their logistics. My board is looking to restructure a 9-figure portfolio next quarter. We want your firm to take the lead." I shook his hand, securing a contract that would triple the valuation of Harris Financial in a single evening. The summit was a total triumph. The desert dust settled over the following weeks, revealing the stark, unforgiving landscape of consequence. The aristocratic illusion Preston and Olivia had constructed collapsed under the weight of severe legal scrutiny. When the Kensington bankruptcy became public knowledge, the creditors descended like vultures upon the estate. Preston did not stay to fight for the woman he had intended to marry. Stripped of his leverage and facing severe federal inquiries into his hidden debts, he packed his remaining belongings and fled the state, leaving no forwarding address. He left Olivia standing alone in the wreckage of her counterfeit life. The high-interest retail credit cards she had maxed out to purchase her replica designer wardrobe came due. Without my silent financial backing, or Preston's fictional trust fund, the minimum payments triggered a catastrophic default cascade. The bank seized her luxury sport utility vehicle in the middle of the night. Her credit score, already precarious, plummeted into the dark depths of total insolvency. The pearl-encrusted gown, stained with the dirt of the resort parking lot, hung in a cheap apartment closet, a heavy reminder of the empire she had tried to steal. Survival requires income. Stripped of her country club aspirations and cut off from Beatrice's dwindling resources, Olivia was forced to enter the unforgiving reality of the local job market. Her resume consisted of vague social event planning and inflated personal assistant roles. She applied for dozens of corporate positions, facing swift rejection after swift rejection. Eventually, a temp agency placed her in a low-tier administrative role. She was hired as a front desk receptionist at a local subsidiary of Easy Finance Today, an emerging consumer credit agency. Her duties involved answering a multi-line plastic telephone, filing consumer debt reports, and making coffee for the loan officers. She sat behind a particle board desk wearing discount department store blouses, a far cry from the Parisian silk she had once paraded around Paradise Valley. What Olivia did not know, and what she would soon discover when the quarterly corporate restructuring emails arrived in her inbox, was the identity of the parent company that had just executed a hostile takeover of that exact subsidiary. Harris Financial had acquired the regional branches of Easy Finance Today 2 weeks prior. I was the new owner. I owned the building she sat in. I owned the payroll system that processed her meager hourly wages. The sister who had deemed me too corporate and overbearing to attend her wedding was now reduced to answering phones for my expanding financial empire. The poetry of the situation required no translation. The scales were permanently balanced. On a quiet Friday evening a month after the Desert Summit, I stood on the expansive back balcony of my foothills home. The Arizona sun was setting, painting the sky in deep, vibrant streaks of copper and violet. The dry wind rustled through the mesquite trees, carrying the faint, earthy scent of sagebrush. The heavy glass door slid open behind me. Maya and David stepped onto the patio. David carried 3 glasses of aged bourbon. He handed one to Maya and one to me. He looked rested, his shoulders relaxed beneath his casual shirt. He had changed his phone number the week after the summit, effectively cutting off the relentless stream of manipulative voicemails from our mother. Beatrice was living in a quiet, isolated exile of her own making, unable to access the children she had tried to use as stepping stones. David was finally charting his own course, unburdened by the ghosts of our childhood or the demands of a toxic matriarch. Maya leaned against the iron railing, taking a slow sip of her drink. She looked out over the sprawling valley, the city lights beginning to flicker on as the darkness gathered across the desert floor. The final audit on the Easy Finance Today acquisition cleared this morning, Maya noted, her voice carrying that familiar, crisp satisfaction of a perfectly balanced ledger. The transition is seamless. The subsidiary is officially under the Harris Financial umbrella. I took a sip of the bourbon. The liquid burned a smooth, warm path down my throat. You know, David said, looking down into his glass with a thoughtful expression, $35,000 is a steep price for a catering deposit. I turned to look at my brother then, out at the vast, unbroken horizon of the Sonoran Desert. I thought about the heavy emerald blazer hanging in my closet. I thought about the 9-figure commercial real estate portfolio sitting on my glass desk. I thought about the undeniable peace radiating through my quiet, minimalist home. I did not lose a single dollar, I replied, my voice steady and certain in the twilight. That initial wire transfer was never a loss. It was an investment. It purchased the magnifying glass that exposed a network of lies. It bought the heavy black gates that kept the parasites outside the walls. It secured the unshakable loyalty of the people who actually mattered. The $35,000 was the exact purchase price of my freedom, my self-respect, and $1 million corporate empire. I raised my glass toward the desert sky, acknowledging the harsh, beautiful reality of the world I had built. Maya and David raised their glasses in return. The crystal clinked in the quiet evening air, a clear, ringing sound of total victory. The game was over, the board was cleared, and I held all the winning pieces. We spend our lives building houses, but how often do we stop to examine the foundation? When the dust finally settled on the crushed white gravel of the Sonoran Oasis Resort, the true casualty was not a canceled wedding, nor was it a $35,000 deposit. The real wreckage left behind in the Arizona desert was a family that had been quietly collapsing for decades. The story of Jacinta, Olivia, and Beatrice is more than a tale of corporate revenge or financial sabotage. At its beating heart, it is a devastating mirror held up to the core of American family dynamics, reflecting the profound consequences of the values we choose to instill in our children. In the traditional American family structure, parents are the initial architects of a child's reality. We hand them the blueprints for how to love, how to trust, and how to measure their own worth. Beatrice Harris did not hand her daughters a blueprint for a secure home. She handed them a cold corporate ledger. By overtly favoring Olivia's social ambitions while treating Jacintha's hard-earned competence as a mere utility, Beatrice established a toxic economy of love. In a healthy family, fairness and honesty are the bedrock. Children need to know that their value is inherent, not conditional upon their ability to secure a wealthy spouse or fund a lavish lifestyle. When Beatrice weaponized her affection, she taught Olivia that appearances were a matter of life and death. She taught her that a $10,000 silk gown and an aristocratic last name were acceptable substitutes for genuine character. This is a quiet tragedy that plays out in living rooms across the country, parents pushing their children toward the illusion of success rather than the substance of integrity. Olivia did not become a liar in a vacuum. She was trained by a mother who believed that the truth was flexible as long as the neighbors were impressed. She learned to forge wire transfers and buy counterfeit designer bags because she was raised in an environment where failure to project wealth was treated as a moral failing. We live in a culture that frequently equates visibility with viability. The American dream, when warped by vanity, can convince a family that ascending the social ladder justifies burning the rungs beneath them. Emotional awareness is often the first casualty of this blind ambition. Consider the Kensingtons. They were a family suffocating under the weight of offshore debt and predatory loans. Yet Mrs. Kensington dedicated her remaining energy to policing the financial purity of her prospective daughter-in-law. Both families were entirely devoid of emotional awareness. They could not recognize the desperate, starving humanity in their own children because they were too busy evaluating their market value. Parenting requires the courage to look at your child and see who they actually are, not who you need them to be for your country club peers. If Beatrice had possessed an ounce of emotional awareness, she would have seen the crushing anxiety driving Olivia's counterfeit life. She would have recognized the profound, lonely exhaustion in David the son, who spent his life mediating a war he never started. Instead, she demanded they all play their assigned parts in her stage play, prioritizing the audience over the actors. And then there is Jacintha. Her journey highlights a crucial conversation about family responsibility. In many households, there is the capable child, the one who is financially stable, emotionally disciplined, and ruthlessly pragmatic. Society, and often the family itself, implicitly expects this child to absorb the shocks, to pay the debts, and to swallow their own mistreatment for the sake of keeping the peace. But as Jacintha so powerfully demonstrated, peace is just another word for surrender when it requires you to finance your own abuse. Long-term guidance for children should never include the lesson that setting boundaries is an act of betrayal. True family responsibility does not mean writing a blank check to subsidize a sibling's delusion. It means having the formidable strength to lock the door when the house is on fire, forcing the arsonists to face the flames. By stepping away, Jacintha broke a generational curse. She refused to pass down the doctrine of silent suffering. She modeled the ultimate form of self-respect, proving that true loyalty begins with being loyal to the truth. Raising children is the ultimate act of faith, but it must be grounded in reality. When we teach our children to value optics over honesty, we send them into the world defenseless. We send them out like Preston and Olivia, two terrified individuals hiding behind forged bank statements and fake leather, marrying each other not out of love, but out of a desperate need to survive their own lies. What kind of legacy are we leaving if our children feel they must fake a trust fund to be worthy of standing at an altar? What have we done if our sons and daughters believe that a declined credit card is a fatal blow to their humanity? The role of a parent is to be the safe harbor where the truth is spoken, no matter how uncomfortable. It is to teach children that a life built on a modest, honest income is infinitely more valuable than an empire built on mezzanine debt. It is to show them that respect is earned through character, not through a curated social media feed. If we fail in this, we do not just raise unhappy adults, we raise active threats to their own well-being. As the dust settles on the desert asphalt and the taillights fade into the night, we are left to sweep up the glass of these shattered illusions. Jacintha stood on her balcony overlooking a sprawling corporate empire, holding a glass of aged bourbon. She had won her freedom, but she had to orphan herself to do it. It is a triumphant victory, yet laced with the inescapable sorrow of what could have been if her mother had simply loved her children for who they were rather than what they could provide. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to build a corporate wall just to protect your own heart from the people who were supposed to love you most, you are not alone. Join our community of survivors and strategists. Hit the subscribe button and follow the channel Mourning Revenge for more stories about the exact moments people stop translating abuse and start setting unshakable boundaries. Look around your own dining room table tonight. Look at the children who are watching you, absorbing every subtle lesson about what matters in this world. Are you building a foundation they can stand on when the storms come? Or are you handing them a beautifully embossed invitation to a locked door? The choices we make today will become the reality they must survive tomorrow. The question is, when the truth finally arrives, will your family be standing on solid ground, or will they be left fighting in the dust?